He bought her building, not as a gift, not as a gesture, as a trap. The eviction notices appeared on every door at 6 in the morning. Crisp white envelopes slid under thresholds while tenants were still asleep. Rent tripled overnight, 2 weeks to vacate. No negotiation, no explanation, just a name stamped at the bottom of the notice in clean black ink, Taesung Global Group. Imani Brooks stood in the hallway of her apartment building, notice in her hand, and felt the blood drain from her face. She knew that name. She had typed it 10,000 times. She had answered phones in its name, signed documents beneath it, organized its contracts, and shielded its secrets for 3 years. She had just resigned from that name 4 days ago. And now it was printed at the bottom of her eviction notice. He found a way to follow her anyway. If you were standing in that hallway, holding that paper, knowing who sent it, knowing what he was capable of, what would you do? Would you run? Would you fight? Would you walk straight into the lion's den and demand an answer? Imani Brooks did all three, in that order. And nothing that followed went the way she planned. This is her story. If you're watching for the first time, welcome, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss what comes next, because this one goes places you won't see coming. Drop your city and country in the comments right now. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Like this video if you're already angry on her behalf. Because trust me, it gets worse before it gets better. Now stay with me, because we're starting from the beginning. 3 years, 4 months, and 11 days. That was how long Imani Brooks had worked for Kang Tae-jin, and she knew the exact count because she had started keeping track. The morning he made a junior vice president cry in the middle of a conference call by saying nothing, just staring at the man through the glass wall of his office until the VP lost his composure entirely and stumbled through an apology for numbers that weren't even wrong. Tae-jin hadn't raised his voice, hadn't moved from his chair, had simply looked at the man until the silence became unbearable. That was the day Imani started her mental countdown. Not because she was afraid of him, she had never been afraid of him, which was, depending on who you asked inside Taesung Global Group, either proof of her extraordinary competence or proof that she had absolutely no idea who she was actually working for. She suspected it was both. Taesung Global occupied the top 4 floors of a steel and glass tower in the heart of Seoul's financial district. And from the outside, it looked like every other multinational shipping corporation in the neighborhood. Respectable, boring, enormous. The kind of company that sponsored charity galas and published annual sustainability reports and employed approximately 4,000 people across 11 countries, most of whom had no idea that the man at the top of the organization chart also controlled the most disciplined and feared criminal network in Korea. Imani had figured that part out herself, about 8 months in, when she noticed that certain cargo shipments were flagged in the internal system with a secondary routing code she'd never been trained on. And when she asked the logistics director about it, the man had gone the color of old chalk and told her she had misread the manifest. She hadn't misread anything. She had a near photographic memory for numbers, which was one of the reasons Tae-jin had hired her and one of the reasons she had never brought it up again. Instead, she had quietly learned to read the room. She had learned which meetings she was supposed to attend, which documents she was supposed to process without reading, and which phone calls required her to step out, close the door, and pretend she hadn't heard the tone in his voice shift from executive to something older and colder and entirely different. For 3 years, she had done her job. The real job, the scheduling and the correspondence and the crisis management and the 1,000 small logistical miracles that kept Tae-jin's legitimate empire running. And she had kept her head down and her eyes forward and told herself it wasn't her business. But it was getting harder to believe that. The transfer request had arrived at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, routed through her work email with a priority flag she had never seen attached to anything but genuine emergencies. The sender was an internal subsidiary account she didn't recognize. The amount was 4.2 million. The destination account was offshore. The authorization field had Tae-jin's name on it, but the digital signature wasn't the one she used when processing his routine approvals. Someone had copied his credentials, or he had authorized it through a channel she didn't have access to. Either way, she was being asked to process a wire transfer at midnight that smelled wrong in every direction. She had stared at her laptop screen for 11 minutes. Then she had processed it, flagged it internally with a note that she had executed under direct instruction, and sat very still in her apartment for a long time afterward, feeling the particular sick weight of a decision she couldn't take back. The next morning, she had typed her resignation letter before her first cup of coffee. She had printed 2 copies, signed both, and taken the elevator to the 38th floor with her chest tight and her hands steady and absolutely no plan for what came after. Taejin's office occupied the entire north face of the 38th floor, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Han River, a desk the size of a small aircraft carrier, and almost no personal items. One framed photograph she had never been able to see clearly enough to identify. A single potted plant she watered on Mondays because she had learned early that if she didn't, it died, and he replaced it with an identical one without comment, which she found quietly sad in a way she couldn't articulate. He was standing at the window when she entered. Not unusual. He stood at that window when he was working through something, which was most of the time. He had his jacket on, which meant he'd been there since before 7. He hung the jacket up the moment he arrived and only put it back on when he was leaving or when someone important was coming. Since she hadn't scheduled anyone, she was the important arrival. He knew she was coming. Of course he did. She crossed the office and placed 1 copy of the resignation letter on his desk. She kept the second one. "I'm resigning," she said. "Effective in 2 weeks, or immediately, if you prefer." Taejin turned from the window. He looked at the letter. Then he looked at her. His expression did what it always did. Stayed exactly the same on the surface while something moved behind his eyes that she had spent 3 years failing to name. "No," he said. Amani blinked. "I'm sorry?" "No," he said again, same flat, unhurried delivery. "Your resignation is not accepted." She stared at him. "That's not... You can't just refuse a resignation. I have rights under Korean labor law. I have given notice. I am leaving." "You've been working for 16 days straight without a day off." He moved from the window to his desk and sat, picking up the letter without opening it. "You're exhausted and you made a decision at midnight. Take the week. Sleep. We can discuss this when you're thinking clearly." Amani felt the heat crawl up the back of her neck. "I am thinking clearly. I have been thinking about this for months." "Then you can think about it for a few more days." He set the letter down, unopened, on the corner of his desk. Precisely aligned with the edge. He did everything precisely. "I'll have HR schedule your remaining leave." She opened her mouth, closed it, and for one long suspended moment stood in the middle of his vast, silent office, with the river glittering below them and the weight of everything she hadn't said pressing against the inside of her chest. "I need to leave," she said quietly. Not loud, not angry anymore, just honest. "I need to leave this job, and I need to leave this building, and I need to go somewhere where I'm not..." She stopped, started again. "I need a normal life. Whatever this is, it's not that." The thing behind Taejin's eyes moved again, went somewhere complicated. "Take the week," he said again. She took the letter off his desk, put it back in her bag, and walked out. She had handed the second signed copy to HR on her way out of the building. What? 2 weeks later, she moved her last box out of her office on the 36th floor, shook hands with the colleagues who looked genuinely sorry to see her go, and carefully avoided eye contact with the ones who looked relieved, and took the elevator down to the lobby for the last time. Taejin did not appear to say goodbye. She hadn't expected him to. She told herself the hollow feeling in her sternum was relief. The first 4 days of her new life were genuinely good. She slept until 9. She cooked real meals. She started reading a novel she'd bought 18 months ago and never opened. She went for a walk along the river at 7 in the morning and didn't check her email once. On the 5th day, she woke up at 5:30 out of pure muscle memory, lay in the dark staring at the ceiling for 40 minutes, and then got up and reorganized her kitchen cabinets because she didn't know what else to do with the energy. On the 6th day, the envelope appeared under her door. She almost didn't open it. She assumed it was a flyer or a building notice about the elevator maintenance that had been scheduled for next week. She picked it up off the floor and turned it over and saw the return address, a real estate management company she didn't recognize, and felt something small and cold settle into the base of her stomach. She opened it standing in her hallway in her pajamas. "Dear resident, as of the 1st of next month, your monthly rent will be adjusted to reflect current market rates in this district. Your new monthly rate will be..." The number stopped her breathing for a second. She read it again. It didn't change. Triple. It was nearly triple. Failure to accept the new rate in writing within 14 days will result in termination of your current lease agreement. She stood there for a long moment. Then she knocked on her neighbor Mrs. Cho's door, and Mrs. Cho answered in her bathrobe, holding the same envelope. And behind Mrs. Cho, she could hear Mr. and Mrs. Park from down the hall having a very loud conversation in the stairwell. Every door, every unit, the same notice, the same number, the same 14-day clock. Imani went back to her apartment and sat at her kitchen table and did something she rarely allowed herself to do. She stopped moving and let the fear surface fully. She had $11,000 in savings. Not enough for first, last, and deposit on anything comparable in this district. Comparable rents anywhere near her job networks, her neighborhood, the life she had spent 3 years building in this city were exactly what they were charging now. She had no other family in Korea. Her mother was in Atlanta. She had a visa status tied to her previous employment that she was still in the process of transitioning. She was, in the technical and terrifying sense of the word, stuck, which meant whoever had bought this building had done so knowing exactly what it would do to her. She pulled up the property registration database on her laptop. It took her 40 minutes and 3 different search approaches to find the actual owner behind the real estate management company name, because whoever had structured it had buried the trail under 2 holding companies and a subsidiary. But Imani had spent 3 years reading Taejin's financial architecture. She recognized the shape of it. Taesung Global Group, Private Investment Division. She closed the laptop. She sat very still for exactly 60 seconds. Then she put on real clothes, picked up her bag, and got on the subway. She had not planned what she was going to say. She was aware, on some rational level, that walking into the headquarters of a man who ran a criminal organization to confront him about a real estate purchase was not a decision that would hold up well under scrutiny. She was also aware that she was running on 5 days of barely controlled anxiety and 0 sleep, and the particular clarity that comes when you have finally gotten angry enough to stop being afraid. The lobby security team recognized her before she reached the desk. Of course they did. She had worked here for 3 years. 3 of the 4 guards were people she had personally approved timesheets for. None of them stopped her. The elevator to the executive floor required a keycard she no longer had. She was standing in front of it, recalculating, when the panel lit up on its own and the doors opened. Someone had unlocked it from upstairs. She rode up in silence. The 38th floor was quieter than she remembered. The assistant's desk outside Taejin's office, her old desk, was currently empty. The office door was closed. She crossed the floor without knocking and pushed it open. Taejin was not at his desk. He was standing at the window. Same position, same stillness. Like he had never moved. Like she had never left. "You bought my building," Imani said. "Yes," he said. He didn't turn around. "You tripled the rent on every tenant in that building. Families, elderly people, Mrs. Cho, who has lived there for 22 years. You sent eviction notices to 31 households. 29, he turned. Units 3 and 7 were already vacant. She stared at him. That is your correction? That's the part you want to clarify? I wanted to be accurate. I want you to explain to me, she said, and her voice came out lower and steadier than she expected. Why you did that, exactly why. Because if the answer is that you did it to punish me for leaving, I need you to hear me tell you that what you've done to those people is, I did it to keep you alive. The sentence landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Imani's mouth stayed open around the next word she'd been about to say. It took her a moment to find her footing. What? Taejin moved from the window. He sat down, not at his desk, but in one of the chairs across from it, which she had never seen him do. It was such an uncharacteristic gesture that it actually pulled her attention sideways for a second. Sit down, he said. I don't want to sit down. Imani. Just her name. No inflection. But something in the way he said it made her pull out the chair across from him and sit. He looked at her for a long moment, like he was deciding where to start. She had seen him do this before important calls. The 2-second pause where he organized information into the exact order he intended to deliver it. The night you processed that transfer, he said, someone was watching your building. Her stomach clenched. Not my people, he said. The Shin family. They've been building leverage against me for 8 months. You were seen entering Taesung regularly for 3 years. The moment you submitted your resignation, you became accessible in a way my security protocol no longer covered. He paused. To them, you are the easiest possible pressure point. Someone I would not risk. Someone they could take and use. Amani heard her own breathing, slow and deliberate because she was controlling it. You could have told me that, she said. You had just quit. You could have told me anyway. You would have stayed out of obligation. The words came out flat, not unkind. I didn't want that. She looked at him. So you bought my building. I needed to bring every physical security asset on that property under my direct control within 48 hours. Ownership was the fastest legal mechanism. The rent notices were the mechanism for clearing non-essential personnel from vulnerable units to reposition my own people inside the building. He paused again. The amount was set high to achieve rapid response, not as permanent policy. No one will pay that rate. That was never the intention. Amani sat very still. You repositioned your people, she said slowly, into my building. Every security guard in that building as of yesterday morning is mine. The elevator systems have been replaced. The entrance reinforcements are installed. There are 14 camera positions covering every entrance, exit, stairwell, and corridor. He met her eyes. Nothing comes near that building without me knowing in under 90 seconds. She thought about Mrs. Cho in her bathrobe, about the parks in the stairwell, about the envelope under her door at 6 in the morning. You terrified 31, 29 households, she said quietly. Yes. Because of me. He didn't answer that. He didn't need to. Amani pressed her hands flat against her thighs and looked at the window behind him and tried to find somewhere solid to stand inside this conversation. If I had known, she said, that walking away from this job put me in danger, you still would have left. She opened her mouth, closed it. Because he was right, and they both knew it, and the fact that he knew it, that he had known it, pulled something loose inside her chest that she wasn't prepared to examine in this room, in this moment, with him watching her with that careful, measured expression that gave away almost nothing. What happens now? She asked. You come back, he said. Not as my secretary, as... He stopped. The briefest hesitation she had ever heard from him. As someone I can keep safe. Amani stared at him. Someone you can keep safe, she repeated. Yes. That's the offer. That's the reality, he said. The offer is whatever terms you want for returning. She looked at him for a long time. At the man who had never once raised his voice at her, who had also never once told her who he actually was, or what standing near him actually cost her. I'm going to need, she said finally, a much better title than executive secretary. Something shifted in Tae-jin's face. Not a smile. Nothing as readable as that. But something. We can discuss that, he said. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, souls spread in every direction, enormous and indifferent, and 48 hours of barely controlled fear settled in Imani's chest into something harder and quieter, and a great deal more complicated. She had walked out of this office 2 weeks ago believing she was finally free. She understood now that she had never, not for a single day, been as far from this room as she had told herself she was. And standing on that particular truth was, somehow, more terrifying than the men she hadn't known were watching her building. She pulled out her phone and texted Mrs. Cho. Rent situation being resolved. I'll explain everything I can soon. Don't sign anything. Then she put her phone face down on Tae-jin's desk, straightened her back and said, Start from the beginning. Tell me everything about the Shin family. For the first time in 3 years, Kang Tae-jin did exactly what she asked, without editing, without omission, without the careful filtering she had always known was there. And Amani listened and took no notes and remembered everything. The briefing lasted 4 hours. Tae-jin talked and Amani listened, and somewhere in the second hour she stopped being angry and started being afraid in a completely different way. The cold, structural kind of fear that settles in when you realize the danger isn't abstract anymore, isn't a word or a category, but a set of specific names and specific capabilities, and a specific timeline that someone else has been building while you were reorganizing your kitchen cabinets. The Shin family had started as a distribution network operating out of Busan in the mid-90s. Freight, mostly legitimate for the first decade. Then the legitimate work became a shell for something else, and the something else grew faster than the legitimate work. And by the time the Shin family relocated their primary operations to Seoul, they weren't a distribution company anymore. They were a syndicate with money in 12 industries and hands in 4 government ministries, and the kind of institutional patience that made them dangerous in a way that simple violence couldn't replicate. They had been watching Taisung Global for 3 years. Not moving, just watching. Why now? Imani asked. Why make a move now? Because their primary financial backing has a timeline. Hijin refilled his own coffee. She noticed he'd stopped expecting her to do it somewhere in the first hour, which she filed away as either growth or situational awareness. They took on outside investors 18 months ago. Those investors want returns within a 2-year window. That window closes in 6 months. So they need to destabilize you fast enough to acquire your shipping contracts before the deadline. Yes. And using me is the fastest path. He didn't answer. He set down the coffee cup with the same controlled precision he applied to everything, and the non-answer was its own answer, and Imani sat with that for a moment. You said they've been watching this building, she said. Do they know I'm here right now? Yes. The word dropped into the room without cushion. Okay, she said. She didn't let her voice do anything she didn't authorize. Then we need to establish what my actual role is, because right now I'm sitting in your office with no title, no contract, no defined function, and if your enemies are watching this building, they're going to draw their own conclusions about what I mean to you. Something crossed Taejin's face at that, fast, gone before she could read it cleanly. That's a reasonable concern, he said. It's not a concern. It's an operational problem. She leaned forward slightly. If they think I'm just someone you brought back out of sentiment, they'll move on me sideways. Nothing overt, just pressure. If they think I'm here in a professional capacity, with actual authority, they'll be more cautious. They'll want to understand what I know before they move. Taejin studied her. The way he always studied things, he was reassessing. You're saying we use your position as a delay mechanism. I'm saying we use my position as it actually is. I know your organization's logistics better than most of your senior executives. That's not a cover story. It's a fact. Give me a real function and a real title, and we're not manufacturing anything. A long pause. Strategic Operations Advisor, he said. That works. Your salary will reflect the role. I'll send you a number. The corner of his mouth moved, just barely. You've had that number ready for a while. 3 years, she said. Give or take. She went back to her apartment that night because Taejin's security team had already made it the safest address in the district, and because she needed to sleep in her own bed and look at her own ceiling and think without anyone watching her think. She lay in the dark for 2 hours and thought about the transfer. The midnight wire. The $4.2 million she had processed without asking enough questions because she'd been 11 months past learning not to ask certain questions, and the habit had calcified into reflex. She had known something was wrong. She had flagged it. She had documented her objection in the internal system, and then she had processed it anyway. That was the part she kept returning to. Not what she'd discovered, not what she'd decided. The gap between those two things, the 11 minutes she'd sat at her laptop screen knowing and doing nothing, and then doing it anyway. She didn't sleep well. Her first morning back at Taisung Global started badly and got worse in increments. The executive floor had a particular silence when she stepped off the elevator at 7:45, the kind of silence that meant the people inside it had already heard she was coming and had opinions they weren't ready to say to her face. She could read it in the angle of Minjun's shoulders at the communications desk, in the way 2 junior analysts in the glass conference room stopped talking at the same moment, in the deliberate normalcy of the receptionist's greeting that had about 30% too much eye contact to be genuine. She had been gone 2 weeks and come back with a new title and a meeting already blocked on Taejin's calendar for 8 o'clock. She understood why they were watching her. She didn't have the energy to care. The office Taejin had assigned her was 2 doors down from his own. Smaller, no river view, good bones. Someone had put fresh pens on the desk. She didn't know if that was his instruction or an assistant trying to be welcoming, and she decided it didn't matter, unpacked her laptop, and pulled up the internal logistics database she still had access to through her existing credentials because apparently no one had actually deactivated her login when she resigned. That detail bothered her more than it should have. She was 40 minutes into the shipping records when Director Wu knocked on her open door. Park Wu was 53, silver-haired, and had been the head of Taisung Global's internal operations division for 11 years. He was good at his job, careful with his words, and had always been pleasant to her in the reflexive way that senior executives were pleasant to staff. They didn't consider relevant. I was holding a ceramic coffee mug with both hands, the way people held things when they were trying to appear casual and were not casual. "Ms. Brooks," he said. "Welcome back." "Director Wu." She didn't stand up. "What can I do for you?" He stepped into the office. "I wanted to introduce myself in your new capacity. Strategic Operations Advisor is a significant role. There will be some natural overlap with my division's oversight functions." "I expect so." "It would be helpful," he said, "to have clarity on the scope of your access." She looked at him. He was smiling, but his hands were still wrapped around that mug with a grip she could see the tension in from across the desk. "My access is defined by Director Kong," she said. "If you have specific concerns about division overlap, I'd recommend raising them with him directly." "Of course." The smile didn't move. "I only ask because some of what you'll be reviewing is sensitive. I've worked in this building for over 3 years, Director. Most of what I've touched has been sensitive." "As an executive assistant," he said, gently. The word placed with the particular delicacy of someone who wanted the weight to land without seeming to drop it. Imani set down her pen, looked at him straight. "Are you suggesting my previous role is relevant to my current clearance?" "I'm suggesting," he said, "that there are protocols for a reason. I'm certain Director Kang has given this appropriate consideration." "I'm certain he has too," she said. "Was there something specific you needed, Director, or was this a courtesy call?" A beat. The smile tightened by a millimeter. "Just welcoming you back," he said. "My door is open if you need anything." He left. She watched him go and then turned back to her screen and spent 3 minutes not reading what was in front of her, because the conversation had left a residue she needed to process. Some of what you'll be reviewing is sensitive. He hadn't said that as a warning. He'd said it as a reminder. A quiet, deliberate reminder of where the lines were, delivered with plausible deniability wrapped around it like packing material. She wrote his name down in her paper notebook. Not the digital one. Paper. The 8 o'clock meeting was Tai Jin and his 4 senior security leads, a standing weekly briefing she had scheduled 100 times but never attended. He had added her name to the calendar invite without explanation, and the 4 men who filed into the conference room and found her seated at the table with a legal pad and a cup of coffee processed that development with varying degrees of control. Chief Ryu, head of personal security, showed nothing. He had a face like a held breath, and Imani had always found him professionally alarming in a way she respected. The other 3 were less composed. Taijin walked in last, sat, and opened the meeting without addressing her presence at all, which was its own form of communication. A statement that her being there required no explanation and therefore no objection. She appreciated that more than she expected to. The briefing moved fast. Ryu ran it. The Shin family had increased surveillance on 2 additional Taesung logistics hubs in the past 72 hours, one in Incheon, one in Busan. A mid-level Shin operative had been photographed meeting with an unidentified contact outside a Taesung-affiliated freight company in Gimhae. The Shin family's legal counsel had filed 3 separate information requests with the Trade Ministry in the past month, which meant they were building a regulatory pressure campaign alongside whatever operational moves they were planning. "They're running both tracks simultaneously," Imani said. Every head at the table turned toward her. She kept her eyes on Ryu. Legal pressure through the ministry to create regulatory exposure and operational pressure through surveillance to find a physical leverage point. If one track stalls, the other advances. It also means they're resourced enough to pursue both, without either degrading the other. Ryu looked at Taijin. A question without words. Taijin said nothing. Ryu looked back at Imani. "That assessment is consistent with what we're tracking." "Then the legal track needs to be your visible priority," she said. "If they believe you're focused on the regulatory threat, they'll read that as an opening on the operational side and push harder in that direction. You want them pushing. You want to know where they'll push from." "You're suggesting we invite aggression," one of the other security leads said. His name was Han, and he had been staring at her with the specific expression of a man who had a long-held opinion about what category she fell into and was irritated to find the category insufficient. "I'm suggesting we direct it," she said. "There's a difference." Han looked at Taijin. "Sir." "Continue," Taijin said. To her. She continued. But by noon, she had reviewed 14 months of internal cargo documentation and found 11 entries that didn't sit right. Not wrong in obvious ways, nothing so crude, just off. Delivery windows that were slightly longer than the route distances justified. Cargo inspection timestamps that didn't sequence correctly. Weight certifications that had been signed by the same inspector across 3 different regional hubs on dates that would have required the inspector to be in 2 places within 6 hours. Each anomaly on its own was explainable. An inspector who traveled a lot. A delayed delivery on a hard route. Bureaucratic lag in the timestamp system. Together they described something that moved through Taesung's legitimate operations like water through cracks. Quiet, consistent, invisible to anyone who was only looking at one document at a time. She sat back in her chair and looked at what she'd assembled, and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the building's air conditioning. Someone inside Taesung was helping them. Not a low-level data entry error, not coincidence stacked on coincidence. A deliberate, disciplined pattern of small corruptions that had been running for at minimum 14 months. She needed more records. She put in a system request for an additional 18 months of documentation, flagged it as routine audit preparation, and went to find Tae-jin. Oh. I was in a call when she knocked. He looked up through the glass, read whatever was on her face, and ended the call in 30 seconds flat, in a way that told her he had never ended a call in 30 seconds for anyone else. She came in, closed the door, and put her legal pad on his desk with the 11 anomalies written out in her handwriting. Clean, organized, cross-referenced. He read it without touching it. Just leaned forward and read. The silence lasted almost 2 minutes. "You found this today," he said. "This morning. My intelligence division has had 14 months of access to these same records." "I know." He looked up. "How?" She thought about how to answer that. "I used to organize your schedule around cargo inspection rotations. It was one of the logistics I managed without anyone thinking about it much. I know what normal looks like in those records because I built the normal. I know what the timestamps should say because I was sometimes the person who coordinated the inspections." She paused. "Someone in your intelligence division would look for red flags. I looked for things that were almost right." Tae-jin was quiet for a moment. "Almost right," he repeated. "Almost right is harder to see than wrong," she said. "Wrong gets caught. Almost right gets filed." He stood, moved to the window, the river, the city, the same view he always moved toward when he was recalibrating. She waited. "This narrows the source significantly," he said, not to her specifically, thinking out loud in a way he wouldn't have done 3 weeks ago. "The access required to sustain this pattern without triggering internal flags. It's not frontline logistics. It's someone with override authority on the inspection scheduling system. And someone who knew what a normal variance looked like," Amani said. "Because these aren't random errors, they're calibrated to stay within a range that reads as noise." Tae-jin turned. "How many people have override authority on that system?" "I'd need the access log pulled," she said. "But from what I remember managing the scheduling rotations, probably 6, 7 senior directors. Maybe 8 if there's been a promotion I don't know about." His jaw set, just slightly. "I'll have Ryu pull it," he said. He was already moving back to his desk, already reaching for his phone. "Don't enter this into the digital system yet. Keep it on paper." "I already did." He stopped, looked at her. Something behind his eyes that she still couldn't quite name. "Good," he said. She took the legal pad back. "I need 18 more months of cargo documentation. I put in a system request under audit prep. I'll have it pulled manually and sent to your office by end of day." He paused. "Don't let Wu see the scope of what you're requesting." She looked at him. "Wu has override authority on the scheduling system." A silence. "Yes," Tae-jin said. "Is he on your list of suspects?" Another pause, longer than the first. "He's been a suspect since month 3. I've never had enough to move." Amani stood there and thought about that morning. Wu in her doorway with his ceramic mug and his gentle reminder about protocol and his easy smile and the tension she'd read in his grip. Some of what you'll be reviewing is sensitive. He'd come to her office within 45 minutes of her sitting down at that computer, before she'd requested anything, before she'd pulled a single record. "He came to see me this morning," she said, "before I started pulling records." Tae-jin's expression didn't change. His stillness just got heavier. "What did he say?" she told him. Word for word, because she remembered it exactly. When she finished, Taejin sat very still for a moment, and then he did something she had never seen him do in 3 years and 4 months and 11 days. He exhaled, just once, through his nose, a long, controlled breath that had a weight to it, the weight of something confirmed that he'd hoped wouldn't be. He knows you're looking, Taejin said. Yes. Which means he'll move to cover the records. Or move something else entirely, she said. If he's running communications for the Shin family, they know I'm back in this building. They know what I was doing before I left. They know I found something, or they're afraid I'm about to. She let that land. This changes the timeline, she said. Whatever they were planning, we just shortened it. Taejin looked at her, the long, assessing look that she had learned over years to hold without flinching. Ryu needs to know tonight, he said. Yes. And you need a different route home. Yes. I'm going to ask you something, he said, and I need an honest answer. She waited. Are you scared? She thought about the envelope under her door, about the number on the notice, about lying in the dark at 2 a.m. with the particular fear that doesn't have a shape yet but presses on your chest anyway. Yes, she said, but not in a way that's going to make me stupid. He held her gaze, something in it that settled, like a weight finding its center. Good, he said again, quieter this time. She turned to leave. She had her hand on the door when he said her name. Not her title, just her name, the way he'd said it the morning she'd come to resign, and she stopped. The plant, he said. She turned back. He was looking at the potted plant on the windowsill. The Monday plant, the one she'd watered for 3 years. It died, he said, while you were gone. She looked at it. He was right. The leaves were brown at the edges, curling inward. You didn't replace it, she said. No. She stood in the doorway for a moment with that. I'll water it tomorrow, she said. She left before either of them could make anything more out of it than it was. Well, the rest of the afternoon moved in the specific way that dangerous days move, fast on the surface, each hour densely packed with small tasks and decisions, the larger thing underneath running, like a current you couldn't see but could feel in your legs if you stood still long enough. Ryu came to her office at 4. He closed the door, sat across from her desk. She noticed he took the chair closest to the wall with a sightline to the corridor, which told her things about how he moved through a room. He looked at her legal pad with the anomalies. He read it the same way Taejin had, without touching it, leaning slightly forward. When he finished, he sat back and said, This is 14 months of embedded access. At minimum, she said, I've requested records going back further. If it goes further than 14 months, the Shin approach to Taesung wasn't opportunistic. Ryu's voice was flat and precise. It was planned from the outside, before they made contact with anyone inside. She had thought about this. There's a third possibility, she said. It could be someone who was already positioned inside Taesung before the Shin family made them an offer. Someone who built the access gradually, over years, without a specific handler. And then when the Shin family came looking for an inside connection, the person was already there. Ryu was quiet. That's a longer timeline, he said. It's a more patient one, she said, which fits everything you told me about how they operate. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't read fully. Not hostile, but recalibrating. She was used to being recalibrated by the men in this building and had stopped finding it flattering. Director Kong says you found this in one morning, he said. I had context other analysts didn't have. Context you built by doing a job most people in this organization never took seriously. His voice didn't change pitch. She couldn't tell if that was a compliment or an observation or simply a fact. What do you need from my team? I need a full access log for the cargo inspection override system going back 36 months, she said, pulled manually, not through the standard request portal, and reviewed only by people you've personally cleared. Done. I need surveillance on Director Wu's outgoing communications, not his official Taesung channels, his personal devices. If he's running communications for the Shin family, it'll be on hardware that isn't logged internally. Ryu's expression was unreadable. You're aware that what you're describing requires a level of confidence in the accusation before we execute it. I'm aware. She met his eyes. I'm also telling you that he was in my office this morning before I pulled a single record. He had no professional reason to come and see me. He came because he wanted to take my measure and remind me of the limits of my position. That's not curiosity, that's reconnaissance. A pause. Director Kong was right about you, Ryu said. She didn't ask what he meant, she filed it. One more thing, she said. Whatever's in those expanded records, whatever I find, I need you to understand that if it points definitively at Wu, moving on him too early will signal the Shin family that we've closed the gap. We need to know who else is in the chain before we move on anyone. Ryu nodded once. Agreed. He stood, moved toward the door, stopped. Miss Brooks, he said without turning, the vehicle Ryu team assigned to you for the return route tonight. Don't deviate from it, not for any reason. Including if someone I recognize asks me to? A pause. Especially then, he said. He left. She sat alone in her office while the city outside the windows shifted from gold afternoon light into the early gray of evening, and she looked at the legal pad in front of her and at the expanded record request she'd flagged as routine audit preparation, and she thought about Wu's hands on that ceramic mug, and about the plant on Tae Jin's windowsill with its browning leaves, and about 31 households with eviction notices and 14 months of deliberate, patient corruption running through the shipping records of an organization she had spent 3 years believing she understood. She picked up her pen. She opened the expanded document set that had arrived in her system at 5 o'clock, flagged manual pull, no portal routing, sourced from a server partition she hadn't known existed before today. She started reading. The anomalies in the first 6 months of additional records were subtler than the ones she'd found that morning. She almost missed the first one. Almost. She caught it because of a discrepancy in a weight certification that tied to a specific inspector name she'd seen in the morning's records. The same inspector, the same impossible geography, 14 months earlier than she'd expected. Which meant this had been running for at minimum 26 months. Which meant it had started 6 months after she joined Taesung. She set down her pen and sat with that for a moment and let herself feel the full, cold shape of it. Someone had watched her start at Taesung, had watched her learn the system, build the schedule, integrate herself into the logistics architecture, had waited to see if she became a problem, had decided she wasn't one, had built the operation around the assumption that she would keep her head down and do her job and not look too closely at the things that were almost right. For 26 months, that assumption had been correct. She picked up her pen. She kept reading. She was 40 minutes in and 3 pages deep into notes when her work phone buzzed with a message from an internal number she didn't recognize. She looked at it. Director Wu requests a brief meeting at your convenience. His office, 6 p.m., confidential. She stared at the message. Then she looked at the time. 5:47, 13 minutes. She forwarded the message to Tae Jin and to Ryu simultaneously, put on her jacket, and walked to Wu's office. Not because it was safe, not because she was certain of the outcome, but because the man had been running a patient, careful, invisible operation inside this organization for over 2 years. And he was inviting her to a meeting 13 minutes after she had spent an afternoon pulling his records, and whatever he was about to say to her was information she needed, and he needed to believe she had not yet understood what she was holding. She knocked on his door at 6 o'clock exactly. "Come in," he said. She went in. Wu was seated behind his desk, jacket still on, hands flat on the desk in front of him, not holding anything, for once. He looked tired in a way he hadn't that morning, something behind his eyes that hadn't been there before. She sat in the chair across from him and waited. "I'll be direct," he said. "Please," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Then, "You have no idea what you've walked back into." The sentence landed with a weight that told her it wasn't a threat. It was something more complicated than that. It was a warning. She kept her face neutral. "I'm here to do my job, Director." "Your job," he said, and his voice had shifted, quieter, stripped of the professional warmth from that morning. "Your job, as it currently stands, is going to get you killed. And I need you to hear me say that before the people who want to use you as leverage decide that killing you is more efficient than taking you." Her pulse kicked. She didn't let it show. "Who are you talking about?" she said. He looked at her. Something working in his face, calculation, exhaustion, and something that looked uncomfortably like guilt. "I made a decision 27 months ago," he said, "that I cannot unmake. And I'm telling you right now, before this goes any further, that whatever you found in those records today, and I know you found something, because you are the only person in this building who could, you need to stop. The silence between them stretched. Or what? She said. He opened his mouth, and then his personal phone lit up on the desk, face up, so she could see the screen. And the name on it was not a name, just a number, and his face when he saw it went the color of old chalk. He looked up at her, and what she saw in his face wasn't the controlled, careful executive who had stood in her doorway that morning. It was a man who had just understood that he was out of time. "Get out of this building tonight," he said, low and flat and stripped of everything except urgency. "Don't tell Kong where you're going. Don't use the vehicle his team assigned you. Go somewhere they don't know about and stay there until morning." He picked up the phone, turned away from her. She stood. Her hands were steady. Her pulse was not. She walked out of his office, down the corridor and back to her own door, and she stood outside it for exactly 3 seconds and made a decision she already knew she couldn't take back. She turned away from her office, took the stairwell instead of the elevator, and texted Taijin as she moved, "Don't send the car. Meet me on 37. Bring Ryu. Now." Her phone buzzed back in under 10 seconds. Already moving. She hit the landing on 37 and pushed through the door and found Taijin already there, jacket on, Ryu 2 steps behind him with 2 additional team members she didn't recognize, and she crossed to them and said, without preamble, "Wu is embedded." He confirmed it without meaning to. He's been running for at least 27 months, and whoever is controlling him just called, and it scared him badly enough to warn me personally, which means something is about to happen that even he wasn't told about. Taijin looked at her. The thing behind his eyes was moving fast now, faster than she'd seen before. "The dinner event," Ryu said. Not to her, to Taijin. "Cancel it," Taijin said. "We can't cancel it cleanly on this notice without—" "I know." His voice was flat. "We don't cancel it. We change the execution. Amani is not in this building tonight." "I need to be," she said. They both looked at her. "If they're moving tonight, it's because they think I found something that can close the loop on Wu," she said. "They want to disrupt that before it's actionable, which means the move isn't just about leverage anymore. It's about containment. They need to either take me or remove me before I hand you something you can use." She looked at Taijin. "If I disappear from this building tonight, they know I handed it over. The window closes. Wu goes underground, and you lose the chain." The corridor was quiet except for the distant sound of the building's ventilation and the blood in her own ears. "If I stay visible," she said, "they move on me directly. And when they do, you know exactly who they send." Taijin stood very still. "You're asking me to use you as bait," he said. "I'm telling you it's the only play that keeps the chain intact," she said. The silence between them had a texture she hadn't felt before. Heavier than disagreement, more complicated than trust, edged with something that neither of them was going to name in a corridor on the 37th floor with Ryu and 2 security leads standing 4 feet away. "Ryu," Taijin said. "Sir." "Full asset repositioning. I want coverage on every access point in this building and a secondary perimeter on the street level by 7. He looked at Imani. "You stay where I can see you." She looked back at him. "Where you can see me or where your team can see me?" A beat. "Both," he said. Ryu was already on his radio. The 2 team members moved toward the stairwell. The building around them hummed with the ordinary sounds of an ordinary evening, and somewhere below them Director Wu was ending a phone call that had just told him the choice he'd made 27 months ago had finally run out of road. And Imani stood in the corridor on the 37th floor and understood that she had just crossed a line she had spent 3 years carefully standing behind. Not because someone pushed her, not because she ran out of options, but because she had looked at the situation clearly and walked forward anyway. That was the most frightening thing, not the Shin family, not the embedded operative, not the phone call that had drained the color from Wu's face. The most frightening thing was that she had made the choice herself, and she would make it again. The repositioning took 40 minutes. Imani spent most of it in a small interior office on the 37th floor with no exterior windows, a security lead named Bayek stationed outside the door, and her legal pad open on the table in front of her. She wasn't writing. She was staring at what she'd already written and thinking about Wu's face when that phone lit up. The specific quality of fear on it, Not the fear of consequence, but the fear of something that had already been set in motion and could not be recalled. That was the part she kept returning to. He hadn't looked like a man receiving instructions. He'd looked like a man receiving a notification. The distinction mattered. If whoever controlled Wu was notifying him rather than directing him, it meant the operation had moved past the stage where his cooperation was required, which meant Wu's value to the Shin family had already been extracted, which meant the phone call wasn't orders. It was a deadline. She wrote that down. Ryu came in at 7:12. He sat across from her without preamble, placed a single printed sheet on the table, and said, Wu's personal device pinged a cell tower in the Mapo district at 6:43. He left the building. She looked at the sheet. A time-stamped location trace, not from Tai Sung's internal system, from something Ryu's team ran independently. She filed that detail about Ryu's operational infrastructure for later. He ran, she said. He took a vehicle not registered to him, drove to Mapo, and his phone went dark at 6:51. She thought about that. He's not running from us. He's running from them. Ryu's expression didn't change, consistent with what you described from the meeting. He warned me, and then he ran. She said it aloud to hear the shape of it, which means whatever they called to tell him, it was something he didn't sanction, something that crossed a line even for him, or something that implicated him in a way he hadn't agreed to. She looked up. What do you mean? Ryu put a second sheet on the table. It was a financial record, an internal Taisung transfer, not the midnight wire she'd processed. A different one. Earlier. 18 months ago. The destination account was offshore, the amount was smaller, $800,000, and the authorization field had two names on it, Kong Tai-jin and Park Woo. She looked at it, read it twice, set it down carefully, the way you set down something fragile. This is real, she said. The signature verification is pending, Ryu said, but the record exists in the system and it has been there for 18 months. It could be fabricated. Yes. It could be a plant, something the Shin family inserted into the system through Wu's access to use as leverage against Director Kong if the operation required it. Also, yes. She looked at him. Or it could be real, and Director Kong knew about Wu for longer than he told me, and managed him as a controlled asset, and this transfer was part of that management. Ryu said nothing. Which one is it? She said. That, he said, is a question I'm not positioned to answer. She pushed the sheet back across the table toward him. Does Taijin know you found this? I found it 11 minutes ago. Does he know you're showing it to me? A pause. Smaller than his usual ones, which made it larger. No, Ryu said. She sat with that. Why are you showing it to me? She said. Ryu folded his hands on the table. He had large hands, squared off at the knuckles, and he placed them with the same deliberate control he applied to everything. Because Director Kong is managing 17 simultaneous operational threads tonight, and his judgment on anything that concerns you directly is not, he paused, chose the word, uncompromised. She understood what he was saying. She understood what he was not saying. You're telling me, she said slowly, that you're not sure he'll tell me the truth about this if you show it to him first. I'm telling that you deserve to see it before anyone shapes the context around it. He stood. What you do with it is your decision. He left the sheet on the table. She stared at it after he was gone. She found Taejin on the 38th floor in the secondary conference room that Ryu's team had designated as the operational center for the night. 3 screens running surveillance feeds. 2 of his security leads on laptops. A half-eaten container of food someone had brought and no one had touched. He looked up when she came in, read something in her face immediately. Clear the room, he said. The 2 security leads left without question. She waited until the door was closed. She put the transfer sheet on the table between them. He looked at it. His face did nothing visible. That perfect, controlled stillness that she had spent years reading and had gotten better at reading than she'd realized. And what she read now, underneath the stillness, was not surprise. You knew about this, she said. He looked up, met her eyes. Yes. The word landed. She had told herself walking up the stairs that she was prepared for either answer. She understood now that she had been preparing for the wrong one. How long? She said. I found it 8 months ago. 8 months. She kept her voice level through an act of will that cost her something. You found evidence that your head of internal operations was running a double-entry financial scheme with your name on it, and you kept him in his position, and you didn't tell me, and you let me walk into a meeting with him this evening with no, I kept him in position because removing him immediately would have triggered a system wipe on everything he'd touched, Taejin said. His voice was even, but there was tension underneath it, a held quality she hadn't heard from him before. He had dead man protocols built into the data architecture. If his credentials went dark without a controlled handoff, 14 months of embedded records would have been scrubbed before my forensic team could image them. So you managed him. I contained him. You kept him functional so he could keep feeding them information. I kept him functional so I could control what information he fed them. His jaw was tight now. Every piece of intelligence he passed to the Shin family for the last 8 months went through a filter I designed. They think they have an accurate picture of this organization's vulnerabilities. They don't. She stood across the table from him and looked at the man she had worked beside for 3 years and tried to reconcile the version of events he was describing with the version she had been living inside. The midnight transfer, she said. The $4.2 million wire I processed. Something shifted in his face. Was that part of the filter, she said? Was I processing controlled misinformation and you didn't tell me because it was cleaner if my execution was genuine? The silence was too long. Taejin. The transfer was real, he said. The funds went where they were directed. I authorized it through an alternate channel because I needed it processed without Wu's system access flagging it. You authorized a $4.2 million offshore transfer through my login credentials, she said, at midnight, without telling me what it was for. Your credentials were not used. The alternate channel? I processed it. Her voice came out harder than she intended, and she didn't pull it back. I sat at my laptop at midnight, and I processed a transaction I knew was wrong because your name was on the authorization, and I had spent 11 months training myself not to ask questions I wasn't supposed to ask. And I want you to tell me right now whether that was an accident or whether it was a choice you made deliberately because you needed a clean execution, and you knew I would do it. The question sat between them. Taejin did not look away from her. He also did not answer immediately, and the pause was the most honest thing he'd done in the last 10 minutes. It was not deliberate, he said finally. The routing through your queue was a system default I didn't catch in time. I would have redirected it if I had. But you didn't. No. And when I flagged it internally and resigned, you let me go because you... She stopped, reorganized. You let me resign because keeping me here in that moment would have required explaining things you weren't ready to explain. He held her gaze. Yes. She pulled out the chair in front of her and sat down because her legs were making a decision her pride hadn't authorized, and she pressed both palms flat on the table and looked at the transfer sheet and at the document that had her anomaly notes from the morning and at the man across from her who had just confirmed that the situation she'd walked back into was significantly more compromised than he'd indicated. The trap you're building, she said. The one we discussed. The one where we let them believe I'm your weakness and wait for them to reveal themselves. Yes. Does that plan still work if Wu has already told them that I've been pulling records today? A pause. It changes the timeline. By how much? Significantly. Meaning tonight. Possibly. She looked at him. And the record with your name on it. The joint authorization with Wu. Is that fabricated or real? Another pause. This one was different. She could see him deciding not how to answer but whether to, and watching that decision happen in real time was not a comfortable thing. It's real, he said. She closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. Explain it to me, she said. All of it. Not the version you were going to tell me when the time was right. The actual version. He told her. It had started, as these things often did, with something that seemed manageable. Wu had come to Taejin 27 months ago with a problem. A mid-level Shin operative had approached him at a private function, made it clear they knew about a legacy financial irregularity in Wu's personal tax filings from a decade prior, and offered him a choice: cooperate or face exposure. Wu had gone to Taejin instead of cooperating. What Taejin had done next was the part she hadn't been told. He had authorized an $800,000 transfer from a Taesung subsidiary into a holding structure that created a paper trail suggesting Wu's cooperation had been purchased by Taesung as a loyalty investment, framed as a bonus structure. The paper trail was designed to give Wu legal cover. If the Shin family's leverage on the original irregularity was ever exposed, the Taesung transfer would provide an alternative explanation for the movement of funds that wouldn't hold up under the deepest scrutiny, but would hold up under the kind of scrutiny a criminal syndicate could apply. It was, she recognized, a sophisticated protection structure. The kind of thing that only worked if nobody looked too closely at the joint authorization. Nobody had, for 18 months. And then she had started looking at records. The joint authorization was supposed to be a legal shield, she said when he finished. Yes. But if the Shin family found it in Wu's access logs, and they would have found it because Wu would have known it was there, they could reframe it as evidence of direct collusion between you and Wu. Proof that you were managing him as a knowing partner in whatever he was doing. Yes. Which is exactly what they're planning to use it as. Taejin's expression was controlled and tired. She was seeing the tiredness more clearly now than she ever had. Not the physical kind, but the weight of a man who had been holding multiple configurations of the same problem for over 2 years and had made choices at each juncture that he couldn't unmake. The regulatory pressure through the ministry, she said. That's the delivery mechanism. They submit the transfer record as evidence of financial misconduct. Your name, Wu's name, a joint authorization for an offshore account. Ministry investigates. Taesung operations freeze. Shipping contracts void out under the force majeure clauses. Shin family steps in to absorb the contracts under a clean entity. Yes, he said. That's the full play. She sat with the complete picture for a moment. How close are they to filing? She said. Ryu's ministry contacts say the information package has been prepared. It hasn't been submitted, which means they're waiting for something. They're waiting for confirmation that I've been neutralized, she said. Because if I hand you a forensic analysis showing the pattern of embedded corruption and the source traces back to Wu's credentials, the ministry filing becomes defensible. You are the target, not the perpetrator. Wu's records become the evidence that exonerates you. She stopped, looked at him. That's why they moved tonight, she said. Not because I found the records. Because they knew I was capable of finding them when I came back, and they needed to move before I did. Yes. How long have you known I could find them? He looked at her. Since month 8 of your employment. The sentence settled over her like something cold. Month 8. A year before she'd figured it out herself. He had known for 2.5 years that she was the person in this organization most capable of pulling the thread that unraveled everything, and he had kept her in a role that didn't require her to pull it. And when she'd gotten too close to the midnight wire, he had let her resign, and then, when the danger became too immediate, he had brought her back. She stood up. You brought me back, she said, not just to keep me safe. He said nothing. You brought me back because you needed someone who could build the forensic case fast enough to preempt the ministry filing, and I was the only person you trusted to do it without tipping Wu. She heard her own voice, steady, precise, and somewhere underneath it, a fissure she was holding closed through pure concentration. I was the asset all along. You were never. Don't. The word came out sharp enough to cut. Don't tell me what I was or wasn't. Not right now. He stopped. She walked to the window. Not his window. This room's window. Smaller, facing west. The city glittering and indifferent in the dark. She stood with her back to him and pressed one hand against the glass and felt the cold of it against her palm, and breathed. She was angry. She was also, underneath the anger, something more complicated. Not hurt exactly, because hurt required a betrayal of expectation, and she had known for a long time, on some level she hadn't looked at directly, that Taejin never did anything for a single reason. Every action had layers. Every decision served multiple purposes simultaneously. She had admired that quality in him for 3 years and had apparently missed the obvious implication, which was that it applied to her too. She had been a resource, a very valuable, carefully managed resource. The question was what she did with that. She turned around. The filing, she said. When Ryu says it hasn't been submitted, how confident is he in that assessment? Taejin blinked. Whatever he'd been expecting her to say, it wasn't that. High confidence, he has a contact inside the submissions office. If they move on me tonight and succeed, take me or remove me, either one. How quickly can they submit after? Hours. She nodded, processing. Then the timeline is tonight, she said. Whatever they're sending, it comes tonight, which means we either set the trap now, in the next, she checked the clock on the wall, 2 hours, or we lose the window entirely. Tae-jin stood. Imani, I'm not finished being angry, she said flatly. I'm going to be angry about this for a significant amount of time. But I'm also looking at a situation where if we don't move in the next 2 hours, you lose the exoneration window and Taesung loses the shipping contracts. And 29 households in my building are living inside a security fortress for no reason because the thing it was protecting against already happened. She picked up her legal pad. So tell me the trap, the real version, all of it this time. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he told her the real version. What? The restaurant had been selected 3 weeks ago. Not by Tae-jin, by the Shin family, which was the detail that changed everything. Ryu's intelligence had intercepted a location preference communicated through Woo's handler 6 weeks prior, a suggestion, framed as a recommendation, that Tae-jin's next high-visibility public appearance should be at Sora, an exclusive fine dining establishment in Gangnam that the Shin family's intelligence had determined had inadequate private security infrastructure and a kitchen entrance that opened onto an unmonitored service alley. Tae-jin had taken the suggestion, had booked the restaurant, had allowed the booking to be visible on his calendar, the calendar that Woo had read access to through the scheduling system. He had also, in the 3 weeks since, quietly replaced every member of Sora's front-of-house staff with Ryu's people, every waiter, every host, every sommelier. The Shin family will send people who look like staff, Ryu said. He had come back in during the briefing without being called, which told her the room was wired. She filed that too. We expect 2 to 4 individuals inserted into the service roster through forged credentials. Our people will identify them on entry. Expected weaponry, she said. Suppressed sidearms at minimum. She thought about sitting in a restaurant while people who wanted to either take or kill her circulated with serving trays. What's the purpose of my being there, she said. Specifically. You are the target, Tae-jin said. Confirmed presence of the target triggers the operation. If you're not there, they stand down and we lose the opportunity to identify the operatives. And if I'm there, they move on me inside the restaurant. Yes. At which point your people intercept. Yes. And the operatives, when captured, can be questioned about the chain of command, confirming Woo's handler, confirming the Shin family's direct authorization of the operation, which closes the evidentiary loop, Ryu said. Capture of authorized operatives plus Imani's forensic documentation of the embedded records creates a package sufficient to preempt the ministry filing and initiate counter proceedings. She looked at both of them. You need me in that restaurant, she said. Neither of them answered, which was its own answer. She looked at her legal pad. At 3 pages of notes she'd built from a morning's worth of records, the thread of a 27-month operation she'd pulled out of the noise because she knew what normal looked like. And these records weren't quite it. She looked at the transfer sheet with the 2 names. She looked at the plant on Tae-jin's windowsill that he hadn't replaced when it died. She thought about 11 minutes sitting at a laptop screen at midnight, knowing something was wrong and doing it anyway, and the resignation letter she'd typed before her first cup of coffee, and the eviction notice under her door, and Woo's face when that phone lit up. She thought about the choice she'd made in the corridor 2 hours ago. Walking forward anyway, not because she ran out of options, but because she'd looked at the situation clearly. She had called it frightening then. She understood now that frightening wasn't the right word. The right word was irreversible. There's a condition, she said. Name it, Tae-jin said. When this is over, all of it, the Shin family, the ministry threat, the contracts, I want full disclosure, everything. Not the managed version, not the version you decide I can handle. Everything about what this organization is, what it does, and what my actual role inside it will be going forward. Because I am not walking into that restaurant without knowing exactly what I'm walking into, and I am not coming back to this building after without knowing exactly what I'm part of. The room was quiet. And, she said, the apartment building, every tenant gets their original rent rate back and a written guarantee from Taesung's legal office. Permanent, not revocable. Tae-jin looked at her. Yes, he said. To both. She held his gaze for a moment, looking for the layer underneath, the other purpose, the additional function she served in the calculation. She found it. She always found it, with enough time. But she also found something else, something that didn't belong in a calculation, that wasn't clean or strategic or managed, Something that had been sitting in his face every time he said her name in that particular way, every time he turned from the window when she came in, every time he didn't replace the plant. She chose not to examine that right now. "What time is the reservation?" she said. 8:30, Ryu said. She looked at the clock. 41 minutes. "I need to change," she said. "I can't go to a fine dining restaurant in this." She looked down at herself. Work clothes, slightly rumpled from a day that had started at 7:45 and hadn't stopped. "Where's the nearest option?" Ryu opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Taijin with an expression she found briefly satisfying. "There's a clothing storage on 36 for executive event preparation," Taijin said carefully. She stared at him. "You have a wardrobe floor. It's primarily for—" "Take me there," she said. "Wow." The clothing storage was a room she had passed 100 times without opening, which she now understood was not an accident. It held, among other things, a rack of women's formal wear in a range of sizes that told her this had been stocked with deliberate forethought. She chose a deep burgundy dress with a structured bodice that fit her correctly, not approximately, correctly. And while she was changing in the adjacent washroom, she stood in front of the mirror for 30 seconds and looked at her own face. She looked tired. She looked like someone who had been through 14 hours of escalating revelation and was approximately 40 minutes away from sitting in a restaurant as a target. She also, she noted with some surprise, did not look afraid. Not because the fear was gone, but because it had reorganized itself into something more useful. A clean, functional alertness that sat in the back of her mind like a pilot light, steady and contained. She did not look like the woman who had walked into this building 11 days ago with a resignation letter and a need for a normal life. She wasn't sure yet what she looked like instead. She came out of the washroom and Taijin was waiting in the corridor, jacket on, and he looked at her with an expression she had never seen on him before. Not unreadable for once, but very clearly something he was making no effort to conceal. "Ready," she said. He held her gaze for a moment. "For what it's worth," he said. She waited. "I didn't bring you back just for the case." He said it the way he said most things, flat, direct, no decoration, like it was operational information he needed her to have. "I want you to know that." She looked at him for a long moment, at the man who had controlled and managed and protected and used her, sometimes simultaneously, sometimes in the same gesture. "I know," she said. "It doesn't resolve the other things." "No," he said, "it doesn't." "Okay," she said. And then, because she was who she was, and even now couldn't fully suppress it. "Your tie is slightly off-center." He looked down. She straightened it. Her hands were steady. His jaw tightened just slightly. "Let's go," she said. They took the elevator down together, and the city waited outside in the dark. And somewhere in a restaurant in Gangnam, people with forged credentials and suppressed firearms were circulating with serving trays, and the forensic case she had built in a single morning sat on a 37th floor table in her handwriting, and Wu was somewhere in the Mapo district with a dead phone and whatever was left of the choices he had made 27 months ago catching up to him. The elevator doors opened to the lobby. She walked out first. The car ride to Gangnam took 19 minutes. Yamani spent the first 5 watching the city move past the window, and the next 14 going through the operational details with Ryu, who sat in the front passenger seat and delivered information in the same flat, precise cadence he applied to everything, like a man reading coordinates rather than describing a situation where people might die. 14 undercover personnel inside Sora. 6 on exterior perimeter. 2 vehicles staged in the service alley. A medical team 4 blocks out. Communication on encrypted channel 3, earpieces for Taijin and Ryu only. Amani would have no wire, because if the Shin family's people ran a scan on her before moving, a wire would end the operation and possibly end her. She would be sitting in that restaurant with no communication, no weapon, and no way to know if something had gone wrong until it had already gone wrong. "What's my signal?" she said. "If I need to move." "Don't move," Ryu said. "Whatever happens, stay in your chair. Our people will come to you. And if your people are compromised." A pause. "They won't be." "That's not an answer." Ryu turned slightly in his seat. "If the operation fails at the containment level, Taijin moves you. Follow him without question." She looked at Taijin beside her. He was looking straight ahead, jaw set, and he had barely spoken since the lobby. She could feel the tension in him, not visible, not audible, but present in the way air is present before weather changes. A pressure differential. "You've done this before," she said to him. Not a question. "Set a trap?" "Sat in the center of one." He was quiet for a moment. "Yes." "Does it get easier?" "No." He glanced at her. "It gets faster. The waiting part. The part before it starts." "How long is the waiting part tonight?" "We arrive at 8:30. If they've inserted personnel, they'll move within the first 40 minutes. The early part of a meal is highest exposure. Entry, seating, first drinks. They'll want to move before the room settles." She did the arithmetic. 40 minutes of sitting in a chair in a burgundy dress in a restaurant where people wanted to take or kill her. 40 minutes of eating food she wouldn't taste and making conversation she wouldn't remember. She could do 40 minutes. She had done 11 minutes at a laptop screen at midnight. She could do 40 minutes. Sora occupied the top floor of a narrow building set back from the main street by a small stone courtyard, accessible through a discreet entrance marked only by a brushed metal placard. The kind of restaurant that didn't need a sign because the people who needed to know about it already did. Inside, low lighting, 12 tables, a wine program that cost more than most people's monthly rent. And this evening, a service staff composed entirely of people who carried concealed weapons and knew exactly where the exits were. The maitre d', one of Ryu's people, a woman named Ji-eun, who moved with the particular relaxed precision of someone trained to look unhurried while tracking everything, greeted them at the entrance and led them to a corner table with sightlines to the room's two main entry points. Imani sat, took the menu, looked at it without reading it. The room was half full. 8 of the 12 tables occupied, couples, a small business group near the far wall, 2 individuals dining alone. She looked at each face without obviously looking, the way she had learned to assess a room during 3 years of managing a man who was always, on some level, assessing whether the room was safe. 3 of the solo diners were Ryu's people. She could tell by the way they positioned themselves relative to the exits, and by the fact that none of them had touched their food. She couldn't identify the Shin family's people. Not yet. "The wine list," Tae-jin said, across the table from her. Normal voice, normal register, like they were just here. "Whatever you think," she said. He ordered something she didn't catch the name of. The sommelier, a young man with careful hands and eyes that moved too quickly for someone whose job was to talk about grapes, went to retrieve it. She watched him go. "The sommelier," she said quietly, not moving her lips much. "I saw him, Tae-jin said. "Same register. He's not one of yours." "No." "How many others?" "2 so far. The waiter who seated the business group and the kitchen runner who came out at 8:41 for no reason I could identify." He lifted the menu slightly. "Don't look at the kitchen." She looked at the menu. "How do you want to play this?" "Normally, eat, talk, let them make the first move." "What do we talk about?" He looked at her over the menu, something briefly unguarded in his face. "Anything that makes us look like we're not waiting for someone to try to kill us." "That's a narrow brief." "You've managed narrower." She put the menu down, picked up her water glass, breathed through her nose, slow and even, the way she'd been breathing since the car. "Tell me something true," she said, "about yourself. Something I don't know." He looked at her. "Now? We need to look like we're having a real conversation, so have one." He was quiet for a moment, then, "I don't sleep more than 4 hours." "I know that. I scheduled your mornings." "I haven't slept more than 4 hours since I was 19. She looked at him. "Why?" "I don't know. I stopped trying to fix it about 10 years ago." He set down his menu. "Your turn." "I'm afraid of escalators," she said. He stared at her. "You work on the 38th floor. There's an elevator." "You've never once—" "I take the elevator. Always. I have never in 3 years and 4 months taken an escalator in this building or any building. I go out of my way to find stairs or elevators." She kept her voice at conversation level. "It is a completely irrational fear, and I have made my peace with it." He kept looking at her with an expression she had no category for. "I didn't know that," he said. "You weren't supposed to." The sommelier came back with the wine. He poured with steady hands and a performance of attention that was too calibrated, too smooth. The way people perform normalcy when normalcy isn't what they're actually doing. She watched his right hand while he poured and saw the slight tension in the forearm. Not the tension of someone carrying a bottle, but of someone carrying something else. Some additional weight, some additional decision. She looked at Taejin. He had seen it too. The sommelier stepped back, moved toward the next table. She watched him go in her peripheral vision and thought, not yet. He's not ready yet. He's waiting for something. The food came. She ate. It tasted like nothing. Not bad, just absent, because every sense she had was deployed elsewhere, and taste was the lowest priority. She watched Taejin eat with the same mechanical focus, the same peripheral awareness, and thought that they probably looked, from the outside, like two people having a quiet dinner, and from the inside like two people doing exactly what they were doing. 31 minutes in. The business group near the far wall called for the check. 3 of them stood at once, which created a moment of organized movement in the room, chairs scraping, voices rising slightly, the social geometry of a group ending an evening. Normal. Plausible. But it pulled attention toward the far wall for about 15 seconds. She was looking at the kitchen entrance when the sommelier turned. He was 12 feet away. He had stopped pretending to work the next table. His right hand was moving to his jacket, not to his chest, to his hip, and the movement had the quality of something practiced and inevitable, the beginning of a sequence that had its own momentum. She stood up. Not because she planned to. Her body made the decision before her mind authorized it. The same instinct that had spent 3 years managing crises before they became disasters. The same reflex that had kept her functional in the most dangerous executive office in Seoul, and it stood her up at the precise wrong moment, reaching for her wine glass for a reason she didn't consciously know, and her elbow caught the edge of the heavy round dining table. The table went over. It didn't tip. It went. The full weight of it, the wine glasses, the cutlery, the half-eaten dinner, the candles, all of it rotating in a mass and hitting the floor on its side with an impact that rang through the room like a gunshot, which was the moment the actual gunshot started. Suppressed. The sound was more mechanical than explosive, a series of sharp, compressed cracks rather than the cinema sound she would have expected. And she was already down, not because she'd chosen to go down, but because the table had taken her with it, her knees hitting the floor, the table's edge rising in front of her like a wall. She heard Taejin hit the floor beside her, felt his arm come across her back, his weight over her left shoulder, and for a moment the room was all sound and no vision, the crack of suppressed fire, something shattering above the table's edge, raised voices, the specific rapid footfall sound of people moving very fast in a space not designed for it. Then Ryu's voice, in Korean, one word, loud and flat and absolute. Silence. Not complete silence. The sound of breathing, of something, someone, hitting the floor somewhere across the room. The sound of Jian at the entrance saying something rapid and controlled into a communication device. Taejin's arm was still across her back. She could feel his breathing, fast, controlled, the kind of breathing that was managing something. "Are you hit?" he said. Into her hair, close, the words barely above a whisper. "No." She took stock. Her knees hurt where they'd hit the floor. Her right palm was cut. She'd caught the edge of a broken glass when she went down. Nothing that mattered. "You?" "No." She lifted her head above the edge of the overturned table. The sommelier was on the floor, face down, with 2 of Ryu's people holding his arms. The kitchen runner was against the far wall with the 3rd operative's forearm across his throat. The 3rd Shin operative, she'd missed him entirely. She hadn't identified him, and the gap in her assessment hit her like cold water, was face down near the entrance, Jian crouched over him with his arm cranked at a severe angle. 3. Not 2. 3. Ryu was standing in the center of the room with a phone to his ear, and he caught her eyes across the overturned table and gave her a single brief nod. She sat up fully. Her hands were shaking. She noticed this and disapproved and breathed through her nose until they stopped. Taejin sat up beside her. His jacket had a tear across the left shoulder, caught on something when he went down. His hand came to her right hand, the one that was bleeding, and he looked at it without speaking. "It's fine," she said. He didn't let go of it. She didn't pull away. The room was locked down within 4 minutes. The remaining guests, the 2 genuine civilians who had been dining when everything went wrong, were managed by Ryu's people with a cover story about a gas leak and an efficiency that spoke to this not being the first time the protocol had been executed. Imani sat in a chair that someone had righted, her hand wrapped in a cloth napkin someone had pressed into it, and watched Ryu's people work. She had her legal pad. Someone had thought to bring her bag from the car, and she had the legal pad out and was writing because writing steadied her, and because the operational debrief that needed to happen would be cleaner if she organized her observations now, while they were fresh. The sommelier had been conscious through his capture and was proving it by radiating a particular quality of silence. Not the silence of someone who had nothing to say, but of someone calculating exactly how much they had to say. She had seen that quality before. In Wu. In the junior VP who'd cried on the conference call. In everyone who sat across from Kang Tai-jin and tried to decide how much the truth would cost them. Ryu brought him to a chair across the table from her and Tai-jin. The man looked up close like someone her mother would have called ordinary. Mid-30s. Average build. The kind of face that was specifically designed to be unremarkable. He had a cut on his cheekbone from the floor, and his jacket was gone, and he sat with the cuffed hand stillness of someone who had accepted a particular consequence without accepting everything else. Name, Ryu said. Nothing. You have 3 colleagues who are currently in separate rooms making individual calculations, Ryu said. The first one who speaks gets the lightest consequence. This is not a threat, it's a scheduling fact. Still nothing, but his jaw moved slightly. A micro-adjustment, a thought being swallowed. Imani set down her pen, looked at him straight. You were sent here specifically for me, she said. Not for Director Kang, for me. Which means whoever authorized this operation made a specific assessment of what I know and decided that removing me was more important than the timing of whatever else they had planned. She paused. Which means they're scared of what I found. Which means what I found is more damaging than I currently understand. The man looked at her. She held his gaze. Help me understand how bad it is, she said. Because right now I'm working from 14 months of cargo records and an $800,000 transfer. And I suspect the actual number is significantly larger. A beat. Then, you have no idea, he said. His Korean was Busan accented, not the handler class, operational class. Someone who executed rather than designed. Tell me, she said. It's not cargo, he said. The cargo records are misdirection. The actual operation doesn't move through the shipping system. She kept her face neutral even as everything she'd spent the day building began to rearrange itself behind her eyes. What does it move through? He looked at Tai-jin then. For the first time since he'd been sat down, he looked directly at Tai-jin, and the look had a specific quality. Not fear, not defiance. Something closer to professional assessment. You know, he said, to Tai-jin. You've known for at least 6 months. That's what we couldn't understand, why you hadn't moved. Tai-jin said nothing. The operative turned back to Imani. The subsidiary accounts, not the shipping subsidiaries, the property management subsidiaries, 18 of them, across 7 countries. The Shin family has been running funds through the property management structure for 31 months. Imani's pen stopped moving. She looked at Tai-jin. His face was still, completely, deliberately still. Director Kang, she said, quiet, precise. How many property management subsidiaries does Taesung Global operate? A pause that lasted exactly 1 second too long. 18, he said. The room was very quiet. She put her pen down, picked it up, put it down again. Ryu, she said without turning, take him to the other room. Ms. Brooks, please. Ryu moved the operative out. She heard the door close. She sat at the table in the wrecked restaurant with the overturned table still on its side nearby and the broken glass still on the floor, and looked at Kang Tai-jin across 2 feet of tablecloth and thought about all the things she still didn't know. The property management subsidiaries, she said. Imani. Say my name one more time without answering the question, and I will walk out of this building and keep walking. Her voice was level. It was the most dangerous it had been all night. How long? He held her gaze. 7 months. They've been running funds through your property subsidiaries for 7 months, and you knew. I discovered it 7 months ago. I did not know when it started. What did you do when you discovered it? I began building a record. You began building a record, she repeated. 7 months ago. You had evidence of active money laundering through your own corporate infrastructure, and your response was to document it and say nothing. Moving immediately would have triggered the same dead man protocols as Wu. Her voice went flat. I know. I understand the operational logic. I understood it 2 hours ago when you explained it about Wu, and I understand it now. What I want you to answer is this. She leaned forward. Did you know when you brought me back that the forensic case I was going to build would eventually lead to the subsidiaries? The pause was the length of a held breath. Yes, he said. She sat back, pressed her palms flat on the table, breathed. You needed me to find it independently, she said, so that the forensic documentation had a clean chain of custody. If you brought it to a ministry investigator yourself, it looks like you're managing the narrative. If your strategic operations advisor finds it through an internal audit and presents it as an independent discovery, it's unimpeachable, he said. I'm the evidence, she said. Not a question. You're the analyst, he said. There's a difference. Is there? She looked at him. Because from where I'm sitting, you have used my independence and my credibility and my complete ignorance of the full scope of the situation as the thing that makes your legal defense work. And you did it while telling me you brought me back to keep me safe. Both things are true. Taijin. She said his name the way he said hers. Flat, direct, no decoration. Both things cannot be true in a way that excuses either of them. He looked at her. And for the first time since she had known him, 3 years, 4 months, and however many days it had been since she'd stopped counting, his face did something she didn't have a category for. Not the movement behind the eyes, not the controlled recalibration. Something that came to the surface instead of staying underneath it. No, he said. They can't. The silence between them was different from the silences they'd shared before. It didn't have the weight of things unsaid. It had the weight of things said that couldn't be taken back. She picked up her pen. The subsidiary records, she said. I need access to all 18 property management entities. Tonight, if possible. I'll have it routed to your laptop. I also need a direct line to whoever Ryu's ministry contact is. Not through Ryu. Direct. He didn't hesitate. Done. And I need to know if Wu is findable, because the chain of custody on the subsidiary funds is going to need corroboration that doesn't come from you or from me, and Wu is the only person who is positioned to witness both ends of the operation. Taijin reached for his phone. Ryu started a trace the moment Wu's phone went dark. He looked at the screen, looked up. He's in Incheon, a storage facility registered to one of the freight subsidiaries. Ryu thinks he went there because he had something cached. Documents, records, leverage he was holding for exactly this scenario. He's going to trade, she said. That's why he ran there instead of running out. He has something he can trade for immunity, and he's been sitting in that facility for the last 2 hours deciding whether to make the call. Yes. Does he have your number? Taijin looked at her. Yes. Then we wait for him to use it. She stood. In the meantime, I'm going to need a workspace that isn't a restaurant with a crime scene in it. Is there somewhere in this building? Ryu opened the door. His face had the particular controlled urgency of someone delivering information he didn't want to deliver. Wu called, he said. She and Taijin looked at him. He didn't call Director Kang, Ryu said. He looked at Imani. He called the Ministry Submissions Office 20 minutes ago. He submitted the financial package. The floor didn't move. It felt like it moved. The package with the joint authorization, she said. Yes. And additional documentation. Ryu's jaw was tight. The submission includes records from the property management subsidiaries, a full accounting, structured to look like evidence of Director Kong's direct involvement in the laundering operation. She looked at Taijin. His face had gone to stone. He played both sides, she said, thinking out loud, fast. He ran from the Shin family because they told him something he didn't sanction, but he didn't run to us. He ran to the ministry. He submitted everything as a whistleblower filing. She was already moving, picking up her bag, her legal pad, the napkin still wrapped around her hand. Which means he's not trading for immunity. He's claiming it, unilaterally. He submitted before we could move on him, before the Shin family could silence him, and he structured the submission to implicate you completely. The filing will freeze Taesung's operating accounts, Ryu said. Ministry protocol on financial misconduct submissions of this scale. Mandatory asset freeze within 24 hours of receipt. How long do we have? If the submission went in 20 minutes ago, the freeze notification goes to the banks at... Ryu checked his phone. 6:14 tomorrow morning. She looked at the clock on the wall. 9 hours and 47 minutes. The forensic counter-analysis I built today, she said, the cargo record anomalies, the inspection timestamp discrepancies, the 26 months of embedded corruption pattern. If I can cross-reference that to the property subsidiary records tonight and produce a counterfiling to the ministry before 6 a.m. It would need to be airtight, Ryu said. Not compelling, airtight. The ministry will not pause a freeze filing on the basis of a competing analysis that isn't definitively supported. I know. She was already looking at Taijin. I need a room, a laptop with full subsidiary access, your forensic accounting files from the last 7 months, and whoever on your team is the best document architect you have. Seo, Taijin said to Ryu. Get her Seo. Ryu was already on the phone. 9 hours, she said. More to herself than to either of them. It's doable. It's not comfortable, but it's doable. Imani. Taijin moved to her. Not touching, just close. Close enough that she could see the thing in his face that had surfaced earlier and hadn't gone back down. If the freeze goes through before the counterfiling is accepted, then we find another path. She met his eyes. But we build the best path first. He looked at her for a moment, longer than was operationally necessary. Why? He said quietly. After everything tonight, after all of it, why? She looked back at him. The question was real. She could hear the reality of it under the words, the genuine bewilderment of a man who operated in calculations and was encountering something that didn't calculate cleanly. She thought about it honestly. Because 29 households need their rent rate back, she said. Because the plant needs watering, and because I'm very good at this and I'm angry enough tonight to be even better than usual. He held her gaze. The thing in his face settled into something she still didn't have a name for, but had stopped needing one. Also, she said, because she had promised herself honesty, and she was choosing to honor that even here, because some of what you did was wrong, and some of it was the only available move, and those two things can both be true, and I can be angry about the first without ignoring the second. And we can have a long, uncomfortable conversation about the lines once this is over. Yes, he said, we can. Good. She turned to Ryu. Where's the room, Bob? The room was a secure workspace on 36, the same floor as the wardrobe storage, and by the time she arrived, Seo was already there. A small, meticulous woman in her 40s, who wore reading glasses on a cord around her neck and had the focused, slightly combustible energy of someone interrupted in the middle of her own project and not entirely pleased about it. You're the one who found the inspection timestamps, Seo said immediately. Not a greeting, an assessment. Yes. I've been trying to find the entry point into that system for 4 months. Seo sat down and opened her own laptop. Walk me through your methodology. Comparative baseline, Imani said, sitting across from her. I knew what a normal inspection cycle looked like because I built the scheduling rotations. So I wasn't looking for wrong entries. I was looking for entries that were almost right but didn't fit the geographical reality of the inspector's circuit. SEO was already typing. The property subsidiary records are different in structure, harder. The corrupted entries won't be timestamp anomalies. They'll be in the intercompany allocation codes. Show me. Seo showed her. For 2 hours they didn't speak except to work. Short, functional exchanges, SEO pulling records, Imani reading them, both of them moving through 18 property management entities across 7 countries with the specific focus of people who understood that the work they were doing had a hard deadline and nothing beyond the work mattered until the work was done. At 11:47, Imani found the pattern in the allocation codes. It was elegant, in the way that deliberate financial corruption is sometimes elegant, not messy or rushed, but carefully constructed. The Shin family's funds entered into the property subsidiaries as management fee income from fictional service contracts, dispersed through legitimate operating expense categories, and exited through quarterly distributions to holding entities that had no visible connection to anything, except they did. Because Imani had spent 3 years managing Taijin's corporate calendar, and she knew that the quarterly distribution dates in the property subsidiary records matched, within 24 hours every quarter for 31 months, the dates of specific logistics contract renewals in the shipping division. The two systems were synchronized, not accidentally, deliberately. It's a wash cycle, she said. CO stopped typing and looked at where Imani was pointing. Read it. Read it again. The shipping contracts generate the legitimate revenue profile that justifies the property distributions, CO said slowly. And the property distributions generate the clean capital that funds the contract acquisition payments, Imani said. It's circular. Each side of the operation validates the other. You can't see it if you're only looking at one system. But you need both system accesses to run it, CO said, which means the person who designed this had senior executive access to both divisions simultaneously, Imani said. They looked at each other. Wu ran internal operations, CO said. Logistics and property, both. Yes. Imani was already writing, fast and precise. And that's exactly what the counterfiling needs to show, not just that the records were manipulated, that the manipulation required a specific access profile that existed in exactly one person, and that person submitted a whistleblower filing tonight to preempt discovery of his own role in designing the system he claimed to be exposing. CO's eyes sharpened. You're going to show that his filing is itself evidence of his culpability. I'm going to show that the evidence he submitted as damaging to Kang Tai-jin is actually most damaging to Park Woo, because the structure of the manipulation requires the access profile he held, not the one Director Kang held. She looked up. How long to build the formal documentation from these records? CO looked at the clock, looked at her screen, looked at the volume of material they still had to cross-reference. Her expression was the expression of someone doing math they didn't entirely like. 5 hours, she said. If we don't stop. We're not stopping, Imani said. They didn't stop. At 2:17 in the morning, Tae-jin came in with coffee he had made himself. She could tell because it was slightly too strong, and he hadn't added anything to it on her behalf, which was actually correct. She took it black, and the fact that he knew that after 3 years of her making his coffee landed somewhere she wasn't examining right now. He set it down, looked at her screen, at the counterfiling structure taking shape in CO's document architecture. He didn't say anything about the work. He pulled up a chair to the side of the room and sat with his own coffee and was quiet in the particular way that meant he was staying without inserting himself. And she found this, against all odds and in spite of everything, the most clarifying thing he had done all night. At 3:44, her phone buzzed with a text from a number she didn't recognize. You're building the counterfiling. You know about the wash cycle. If you find the third system, it ends everything. Routing code 7 Taesung R. Check fiscal year 2 years prior. She stared at it. Tai-jin. He crossed the room in 3 steps. She showed him the phone, watched his face read it. Woo, she said. Yes. He submitted the filing, and now he's feeding us the key to dismantle it. Tae-jin's face was doing complex things. He's playing 3 directions simultaneously. Or he submitted the filing under duress and is trying to correct it without being seen to correct it. She looked at the text. Routing code 7 Taesung R. Third system. What is that? Tae-jin was quiet for a moment that had the texture of something painful. The R designation is Restricted Executive Archive. I'd need... He stopped. There are documents in that archive that have never been part of any operational review. They predate the current executive structure. How far back? 12 years. She looked at him. What's in a 12-year-old archive that dismantles a 31-month laundering operation? He sat down. Not across from her. Beside her. Close enough that she could see the exhaustion in the lines around his eyes. The cost of a night that had moved this fast through this much. 12 years ago, he said. Before Taesung was what it is now. Before I restructured it. The previous financial architecture included a series of legacy investment vehicles that were eventually dissolved. Or were supposed to be dissolved. He paused. I handled the dissolution personally. I have the documentation. But if someone created a parallel record suggesting those vehicles were not dissolved, suggesting they remained active and were later converted to the wash cycle infrastructure, it would make it look like you designed the system, she said. Not Wu, not the Shin family, you. 12 years of intentional architecture. Yes. And Wu's filing included records structured to suggest exactly that. Almost certainly. So the third system is the original dissolution records. She was already pulling up the archive request protocol. The documents that prove the legacy vehicles were closed when you said they were. If we can produce those and cross-reference them against whatever the Shin family fabricated, the entire framing of the filing inverts, Tae-jin said. Instead of 12 years of intentional construction, you have a 2.5-year infiltration campaign using fabricated legacy continuity to frame an existing executive. Which is the truth, she said. Yes, he said. Which is the truth. She met his eyes. This closed, this tired, this far past the point where either of them was performing anything, she could see him clearly in a way she hadn't before. Not better or worse than what she'd thought, just more complete. A man who had made choices she wouldn't have made and decisions that had cost her something real, and who had also, in the end, been sitting beside her in a wrecked restaurant with his arm across her back, and had made her coffee at 2 a.m. and had not replaced the plant. "Get me the archive access," she said. He pulled out his phone and authorized it himself. Right there, direct override, no intermediary. She felt the access unlock on her system. She turned to Seo. "Fiscal year 2 years back," she said. "Restricted Executive Archive, routing code 7 Taesung R. We're looking for legacy vehicle dissolution records, and we're cross-referencing them against every fabricated continuity entry in Wu's submission." Theo was already typing. Outside the windows, the city was dark and enormous and indifferent, and somewhere across the city, a ministry submissions office had a filing that was scheduled to freeze an empire's assets in 3 hours and 9 minutes. And in this room, 2 women with laptops and an exhausted man with black coffee were building the argument that would have to be better than anything the Shin family's lawyers had spent 31 months constructing. Amani rolled up her sleeves, found the first dissolution record, matched it to the first fabricated continuity entry in Wu's filing. The match was clean, direct, and completely irrefutable. "There it is," Seo said under her breath. Amani kept going. The third dissolution record matched at 4:51 in the morning. Seo leaned back in her chair and pressed both hands over her face and held them there for a moment. Not distress, just the physical release of someone who had been holding a sustained concentration for 5 hours and had finally found the end of it. Then she dropped her hands, put her glasses back on, and said, "That's all 18 vehicles. Every fabricated continuity entry in Wu's filing has a corresponding dissolution record that predates it by a minimum of 9 years. Imani set down her pen. Her right hand ached. The cut from the broken glass had stopped bleeding hours ago, but the grip of writing had stiffened the skin around it into something that pulled with every movement. She flexed it once, deliberately, and looked at what they had built. 41 pages of cross-referenced documentation. The wash cycle mapped in full, entry to exit, across all 18 subsidiaries. The fabricated legacy continuity records deconstructed against the genuine dissolution archive, entry by entry. The access profile analysis demonstrating that the architecture of the manipulation required Wu's specific system permissions, not Tae-jin's. And anchoring all of it, the 26 months of cargo record anomalies she'd found in a single morning, the almost right entries that nobody had noticed because they were calibrated to read as noise. It was the most complete piece of financial forensic work she had ever produced, and she had produced it in 5 hours on a cut hand with bad coffee, and a 2-hour head start from a man who was trying to both expose and contain the thing he'd helped build. "How long to format for ministry submission?" she said. Seo was already working. 40 minutes if we move now." "Move now." Seo moved. Imani stood, stretched her back. It cracked in 3 places, loud and graceless, and walked to where Tae-jin was sitting. He had fallen asleep in the chair at the side of the room at some point after 3 o'clock. Not deeply. His chin was down, but his shoulders were still held with that characteristic tension, the posture of a man who had never fully learned to be unguarded, even unconscious. She looked at him for a moment, at the tear in his jacket shoulder, at the coffee cup still in his loosely held hand, long cold. She took the cup gently from his fingers. He woke. Not gradually, immediately, fully, eyes open and focused within a single second, the way people wake when they have spent years training themselves not to be caught unaware. "We have it," she said. He looked at her, read her face. "All of it. All of it. Seo's formatting for submission. We have 40 minutes before we need to file." He stood. The movement was stiff. He was 51 years old and had slept in a chair for 90 minutes after a night that had started with a near shooting, and for a moment he just looked like a man who was tired in a way that went past the physical. Then he straightened, and the posture came back, and she watched the tiredness get managed rather than resolved. She understood that. She was doing the same thing. "The ministry contact," she said, "reuse person in the submissions office. I need them ready to receive and timestamp our filing the moment it goes in." Wu's submission has a 6-hour head start. If there's any question of precedence in how the freeze notification is processed, I'll call Ryu. He was already reaching for his phone. He'll have the contact standing by. She nodded, turned back to Seo. "Format the dissolution records as a primary exhibit, not supplementary. I want the ministry reviewer to see the fabrication evidence before they see anything else." "Understood." Taejin stepped out to call Ryu. Amani sat back down and went through the final document with the particular attention of someone who knew that what they were about to submit could not be recalled and could not contain a single error, and the knowledge that she had not slept, that her hand hurt, that she was running on coffee and controlled adrenaline was not a reason to go faster, but a reason to go more carefully. She found one formatting error on page 33, a subsidiary code transposed, and corrected it. She found a citation gap on page 38 and filled it from the archive. At 5:22, Seo said, "It's ready." Amani read the first page, the last page, and 3 pages from the middle. She signed her name on the analyst certification, her actual signature, not a digital stamp, because she was the analyst, and she was certifying, and she wanted that to be as unambiguous as possible. She handed it to Taejin when he came back. He read it differently than she had. Not for errors, but for exposure. For the places where his own culpability was visible in the record, and how the documentation framed it. She watched him read those parts. "Page 22, she said. "The controlled intelligence operation on Wu. I documented it as an internal security measure taken to preserve forensic integrity." "Which is accurate." "It's also the most defensible framing," he said. "It's the true framing," she said. "I don't write the other kind." He looked at her. "I know." "Page 31, she said. "The midnight transfer. I documented my execution of it, my internal flag, and my resignation as a direct response. All of that is in the record." His jaw tightened slightly. "Also accurate. Also necessary," she said. "If this filing is going to be unimpeachable, it can't selectively exclude the things that are uncomfortable. The ministry reviewer needs to see that the evidence comes from someone who had reason to be adversarial toward the subject and chose accuracy anyway." She paused. "That's what makes it credible." He held her gaze for a moment. "You included it to strengthen the filing." "I included it because it happened," she said. "The strength is a consequence." He was quiet for a moment. Then he handed the document back. "File it," he said. She filed it at 5:31 in the morning. The freeze notification arrived at the banks at 6:14 as scheduled and was met at 6:15 by a counter notification from the Ministry Submissions Office indicating that a competing filing with primary exhibit status had been received and was under expedited review, and that the freeze implementation was being held pending reviewer assessment. Ryu delivered this information by walking into the workspace, standing in the doorway, and saying, "Hold." Just that. Hold. But the quality of it, the specific texture of a word from a man who used as few of them as possible, told her everything. She put her head down on the desk for approximately 4 seconds. Then she sat back up. "How long for the expedited review?" she said. "Hours," Ryu said. "Not days. The reviewer is already in the office." Taejin was standing at the window. The workspace window, the one facing west, the same direction he always seemed to gravitate when he was processing. She had started to understand that the window standing wasn't a performance or a power gesture. It was just how he thought, the distance, the scale of what was outside. "Go home," he said. Not to the room, to her. She looked up. "Review isn't complete. You've done everything that can be done from this room. The rest is the reviewer's process." He turned. "You've been awake for 22 hours. You have a cut on your hand that should have been looked at hours ago. Go home." She looked at him. "You're not going home." "I'll sleep in my office." "That's not sleeping. That's waiting in a horizontal position." The corner of his mouth moved. "Also," she said, "there's a question of whether the Shin family makes any additional moves in the window before the review concludes." I'm not particularly comfortable being in my apartment alone during that window. Ryu cleared his throat from the doorway. The building security is... I know about the building security, she said. I know every camera position and entry reinforcement because you told me. I'm saying that I would personally feel more comfortable remaining in this building until the review concludes. She looked at neither of them specifically. If that's operationally appropriate. Ryu made a sound that was not quite a cough and was definitely not a laugh, and stepped back from the doorway. Taejin looked at her for a moment. There's a suite on 35, he said, kept for operational use. That works, she said. She slept for 4 hours and woke to her phone buzzing with a text from CO. Ministry reviewer flagged Wu's filing as potentially compromised. Counterfiling elevated to senior review. Accounts unfrozen pending full assessment. ETA on final determination, 48 hours. She lay in the unfamiliar bed in the operational suite on 35 and stared at the ceiling and let herself feel, for the first time since the envelope had appeared under her door, what felt like a decade ago, something that approximated relief. Not complete, not clean, but present. A loosening of something that had been held tight for long enough that she'd forgotten what it felt like to not hold it. She got up, washed her face, looked at herself in the bathroom mirror. She looked, she decided, like someone who had been through something. Not broken by it, just marked. The cut on her hand was healing. Her eyes had the particular depth that comes from having been genuinely afraid and come out the other side still functional. She looked like herself, but a version of herself that knew more than she had before. She could work with that. The full ministry determination came 46 hours later. Taejin's operating accounts remained unfrozen. Wu's filing was reclassified as a compromise submission under the ministry's conflict of interest protocol, pending formal investigation of Wu himself. The Shin family's regulatory pressure campaign collapsed the moment its primary evidence base was discredited. A legal architecture that had taken 31 months to construct came down in 46 hours because one person had known what normal looked like and had spent a morning looking for things that were almost right. The Shin family's operational response to the collapse was swift, internal, and ugly in ways that Ryu monitored from a distance and reported on, in the flat, precise cadence of someone reading a damage assessment rather than describing human consequence. 3 senior Shin operatives were removed from their positions within 24 hours of the filing's collapse. The 2 board members who had backed the 2-year timeline were exposed to their own investors as having directed a criminal infiltration campaign against a competitor, which produced a secondary collapse that spread through the Shin family's legitimate holdings like a crack through concrete, fast, structural, not survivable, without a complete organizational rebuild that would take years. Ryu said, "They're done." 2 words. Delivered standing in the doorway of Imani's office. Her real office now, the one on the 38th floor that had been reassigned and refurnished in the 46 hours while the review was pending, river view and everything, which she had not requested and which she was choosing to address at a later date. "What about Wu?" she said. "In custody as of this morning," Ryu said. Ministry investigators moved on the Incheon facility at 6 a.m. He was still there. He had been there for 3 days. A pause. He didn't run. She thought about that. About a man who had made a decision 27 months ago and had spent the years since managing its consequences, and had ended up alone in a storage facility in Incheon with whatever he'd cached there, waiting for an outcome he'd already accepted. "What did he have?" she said. "In the facility." "Documents," Ryu said. "A full parallel record of every transaction he'd processed on behalf of the Shin family. Dates, amounts, authorization chains, a complete accounting." He paused again. "An assigned statement describing the coercion, the original approach, the leverage they used, the escalating demands over 27 months. She looked at him. He was building a case. "From the beginning," Ryu said. "He was never fully cooperative. He fed them controlled information, the same way Director Kong was feeding them controlled information. The problem was that neither of them told the other, and so neither operation knew the other existed, and the Shin family was playing both of them against each other while building a case that implicated both of them simultaneously." She sat with that for a moment. 2 men, both running parallel protective operations against the same threat, neither of whom had trusted the other enough to coordinate, and the gap between them had nearly brought down everything. "He'll cooperate with the ministry," she said. "Fully, from what the investigators say. He's been waiting to cooperate for months. He was waiting for a moment where cooperation wouldn't result in him simply being eliminated before he could testify." "The phone call at our meeting," she said, "the one that scared him." The Shin family had learned he was planning to cooperate. They were calling to notify him that the operation was moving to its final phase regardless of his position. Ryu's expression was, as always, controlled. He submitted the filing as the only move he had left that the Shin family hadn't anticipated. He included the damaging material because removing it would have looked like a sanitized submission and triggered a review process that gave the Shin family time to move on him. "And he sent me the routing code," she said. "Yes." "Because he knew I would use it correctly." Ryu looked at her. "Yes," he said. "He said, when interviewed this morning, that he sent it to you because you were the only person in the organization who had read enough of the correct records to understand what you were looking at." A pause. "He also said he had known, for approximately 18 months, that you were the person most likely to eventually find everything, and that he had considered, during that period, whether to approach you directly." "Why didn't he?" "He wasn't sure," Ryu said, "whether you would believe him over Director Kang." She looked out the window. The river. The city. The enormous indifferent spread of soul in the afternoon light. "He was probably right to be uncertain," she said. Ryu left. She sat in her office for a while, alone, and thought about Park Woo in a storage facility in Incheon for 3 days, waiting. About the weight of a decision made 27 months ago and carried without being able to put it down or hand it to anyone because there was nobody to trust with it. About the specific loneliness of being the person who knows something is wrong and can't find the right angle to make it right without breaking everything in the process. She understood that loneliness better than she'd expected to. She found Taejin on the 38th floor at 7 in the evening, at his desk for the first time in what felt like a week, going through documents with the focused attention of a man trying to rebuild normalcy through the discipline of ordinary work. He looked up when she came in. She sat across from him, not in the client chairs. In the chair she'd pulled up herself the night she came back and he'd told her to sit, and she'd sat, and everything had changed. "Woo's cooperating," she said. "I know." He set down his pen. "Ryu briefed me an hour ago. He was building a parallel case the whole time. He was never fully theirs." "I know that too." She looked at him. "Did you suspect it?" A pause. "I suspected he was managing his cooperation. I didn't know the extent." He held her gaze. "If I had known he had a complete parallel record, I would have found a way to coordinate earlier." "Or you would have managed that too," she said. Not cruelly, just honestly. He didn't argue it. "Possibly." She looked at the desk, at the single-framed photograph she had never been able to see clearly from her position across the room. From where she was sitting now, slightly closer, slightly different angle, she could see it. A woman. Older, warm-faced, standing in front of a building she didn't recognize. Not a professional photo, something personal. She didn't ask. It wasn't the moment. "I've been thinking," she said, "about what I want." He was very still. "You offered, before all of this started, to finance a new life anywhere in the world if I still wanted to leave." She looked at him. "I want to know if that offer is still on the table." Something moved in his face, quick and gone. "Yes," he said, carefully. "Good." She nodded. "I don't want it. But I wanted to know it was real, and not just a thing you said when you were trying to manage the situation." He held her gaze. "It was real." "Okay," she said. "Then here's what I actually want." She put a folded piece of paper on his desk. He looked at it, but didn't pick it up. "That's my terms for staying," she said. "Full title, Strategic Operations Director, not Advisor Director. Independent authority over the legitimate business review. I'm going to be conducting across all 18 property subsidiaries and the full shipping division. A seat at the executive table that doesn't require your endorsement to be taken seriously, and the apartment building." "The building is already, I want it transferred," she said, "not under Taesung Global's private investment division, into a community land trust structure with a resident board that includes Mrs. Cho and the Parks, and whoever else has lived there long enough to have a stake in it. Kaisong retains the security infrastructure. The residents retain the governance. He looked at her. That's, he said, an unusual asset structure for a criminal organization's real estate holdings. You're restructuring the criminal organization, she said. That's the other condition. Not immediately, not all at once. I'm not naive about what that means or how long it takes. But there's a direction of travel, and I need to know what it is before I commit to being part of it. The room was quiet. You're asking me, he said slowly, to define an endpoint. I'm asking you to define a direction, she said. The endpoint takes care of itself if the direction is right. He looked at the paper, at his desk, at the river. The legitimate operations are already the majority of Taisung's revenue, he said. They have been for 4 years. The restructuring you're describing is... He stopped. Chose his words with a care she recognized as genuine, not managed. It's what I've been moving toward, without a clear articulation of it, because articulating it meant committing to it in a way I wasn't certain I could sustain. Articulate it now, she said. He looked at her directly. I want to build something that doesn't require me to be what I've been. The sentence was simple and undecorated, and it landed with the weight of something true. Okay, she said. I can work with that. He picked up the paper, read it again. The salary line, he said. Is the number I've had ready for 3 years, she said, give or take. He looked up, that almost thing at the corner of his mouth. The community land trust structure will require legal architecture that Taisung's current council isn't equipped to build, he said. I have a recommendation. She's in Atlanta, but she does international work. Your mother is a lawyer. She stared at him. How do you know that? 3 years of your personnel file. I've never listed my mother's profession on a personnel. She stopped. You ran a background investigation. A thorough one. On your executive secretary. On someone working 18 inches from my most sensitive operations, he said. His voice was even, but there was something underneath it now. Something that had been underneath it for the entire conversation and was becoming less willing to stay there. I run thorough background investigations on everyone in proximity to those operations. And you kept me anyway. I kept you, he said, because the investigation told me you were the most capable, most discreet, and most genuinely honest person who had ever applied for that position, and because every subsequent day confirmed it. A pause. And because you were the only person in this building who ever told me to eat something or reminded me when I looked exhausted, and I found that, He stopped. She waited. Stabilizing, he said. The word cost him something. She looked at him. At the exhaustion that was still in the lines of his face and the controlled quality of his posture and the way he held the paper with her terms on it like he was deciding how tightly. Sign the terms, she said. I'm going to need to review the legal language on the land trust provision. Sign them in principle, she said. The lawyers can work out the language. He held her gaze. Then he picked up his pen and signed. She took the paper back, folded it, put it in her bag. She stood. He stood, because he always stood when she did, which she had spent 3 years telling herself was just how he was raised, and was now choosing to understand differently. One more thing, she said. He waited. The photograph. She nodded toward the framed photo on his desk. The woman. Who is she? He looked at it. Something in his face softened in a way she had never seen. My mother, he said. She died when I was 19. The year he stopped sleeping. She looked at the photograph for a moment, at the warm-faced woman in front of the building she didn't recognize. She looks kind, she said. She was. He paused. She was also very difficult and extremely stubborn and correct about most things in a way that was exhausting to be around. Another pause. You would have had a lot in common. Imani looked at him. That was almost a compliment. It was entirely a compliment. She picked up her bag. The plant was on the windowsill behind his desk. She had watered it that morning, and it was already looking better, the browning at the leaf edges arrested, the stems straightening toward the light in the unsentimental way that living things do when the conditions improve. Good night, she said. Good night, Imani. She walked to the door, had her hand on it, turned back, because she was who she was, and she apparently couldn't let a thing land without needing to be certain it had landed correctly. Tae-jin. He looked up. Whatever direction of travel we decide on, she said, I need you to understand that I will be honest about it. All of it. Not the managed version, not the version that's easiest to defend. If I see something wrong, I'll say it. If I think you're making a bad decision, I'll say that too. She held his gaze. I'm not going to be the person who keeps their head down and processes things at midnight without asking enough questions. I'm done with that version of this arrangement. He looked at her for a long moment. I'm counting on it, he said. She left. The weeks that followed were not easy. She hadn't expected them to be. The ministry investigation into Wu's activities ran for 11 weeks and involved 3 separate regulatory bodies and a great deal of documentation that Imani had to certify, recertify, and in 2 cases appear in person to discuss with investigators who treated her with the particular combination of respect and suspicion that people reserve for someone who has demonstrated both competence and proximity to wrongdoing. She answered every question completely and without managing any of it. And at the end of the 11 weeks, the investigators issued a finding that exonerated Tai Jin of direct involvement in the laundering operation, classified the Shin family's infiltration as an external criminal conspiracy, and identified Park Wu as a coerced participant whose cooperation had materially assisted the investigation. Wu received a reduced sentence in recognition of that cooperation. She read the determination in her office on a Tuesday morning and sat with it for a while. She didn't know how to feel about it cleanly and decided she didn't need to. It was a complicated outcome for a complicated situation, and the discomfort of that was something she was learning to hold rather than resolve. The restructuring of Taesung's property management subsidiaries took 4 months and involved her mother flying to Seoul for 3 weeks, which produced the surreal experience of watching her mother sit across a conference table from Kang Tae-jin and negotiate the legal architecture of a community land trust with the same relentless, good-natured precision she applied to everything. Her mother, on the second evening, said to Imani over dinner, "He keeps looking at you. He's assessing operational details. He's looking at you the way a man looks at something he's afraid to lose." "Mom, I'm a lawyer. I read people for a living." Her mother refilled her own water glass. "Also, I read people because I'm your mother and it's my job. He's not as frightening as his reputation." "He's exactly as frightening as his reputation," Imani said. "He's also other things." Her mother looked at her, the particular look that had been seen through her since she was 7 years old. "Good other things," Imani said. "Mostly." Her mother nodded, satisfied, and changed the subject. The community land trust structure was completed and executed in month 4. Mrs. Cho was elected to the resident board on the first ballot, which Imani had predicted, and became its first chair, which Imani had also predicted. The security infrastructure stayed. The rents went back to their original rates, locked by the trust structure, not revocable by Taesung or anyone else. Mrs. Cho texted Imani a photograph of the new notice that went up in the building lobby. In the photograph, the notice was crooked on the wall, slightly off-center. Imani texted back, "Perfect." On a Thursday in early spring, 4 months after the night in the restaurant, Imani was at her desk on the 38th floor, working through the final audit report on the shipping division when Tae-jin knocked on her open door. She looked up. He was in his jacket, not because he was arriving or leaving, but because he was wearing it the way he sometimes wore it now, which she had noticed was correlated with him being about to say something that cost him more than usual to say. "There's something I want to show you," he said. She saved her work, followed him down the corridor past his office to a door she had never seen opened. A conference room at the far end of the floor that had always been listed as storage on the building map. He opened the door. It was not storage. It was a room, fully furnished, with a long table and 8 chairs and a wall of windows facing the river, and a whiteboard that had been written on recently, diagrams, arrows, numbers, the beginning stages of something being planned. On the table there were property assessments, financial projections, and 3 folders she recognized as belonging to Taesung's legitimate logistics subsidiary that had been underperforming for 2 years. "This is what I've been building," he said, "for the last 18 months, before you came back, before any of this." He moved to the table, put his hand on one of the folders. The legitimate operations expanded to full capacity within a 3-year restructuring window. The remaining non-legitimate infrastructure wound down through a controlled dissolution process. "I've had the architecture map since last year. I've been waiting for—" He stopped. "For what?" she said. "For someone who could look at it and tell me whether it holds." She walked to the table, picked up the first folder, opened it. The work inside was meticulous, patient, detailed, structured with the kind of long-view precision that took years of institutional knowledge to build. She read 3 pages and understood that this had not been assembled quickly. This was the work of a man who had been moving toward a destination for a long time and had not told anyone the destination because telling someone made it real, and real things could fail. She set the folder down. "It holds," she said. He looked at her. "The logistics subsidiary projection is conservative by about 18%, she said. "I've been running the shipping audit and I know where the underperformance is coming from. It's fixable within the first year of the restructuring window, which means your capacity timeline accelerates." She looked at the whiteboard. "The dissolution architecture needs a legal review before you execute it, and I'd recommend my mother's firm for the cross-border elements, but the structure itself is sound." He was still looking at her. "What?" she said. "You said it holds," he said. "Before you read it." She looked at him. "I know how you work. If you spent 18 months on something, it holds. I read it to understand the specifics." She paused. "That's not the same as blind trust. I would have told you if something was wrong." "I know," he said. "That's why it matters." She set the folder down carefully, looked at the room, the river, the whiteboard, the 8 chairs around the table that were not yet filled. "You're going to need people for this," she said, "not just a legal team, operational people who understand both sides of what Taisung has been and where it's going, and who can execute the transition without the legitimate business losing momentum." "I know. That's going to require a different kind of trust than you're used to." "I know that too." She looked at him. "You said you've been waiting for someone who could tell you whether it holds." She gestured at the room. "What were you actually waiting for?" He held her gaze. The controlled surface of him was still there. It would always be there. It was built into the structure of him. But the thing underneath it was fully visible now, had been for weeks, and she had stopped pretending she couldn't see it. "Someone I didn't have to manage," he said. "Someone I could show this to and have it be real." The room was quiet. "You're showing it to me," she said. "Yes." "So it's real?" "Yes," he said. "It is." She stood in the room with the river outside the windows and the spring light coming through the glass and the whiteboard full of the beginning of something that might actually become what it was trying to be. And she thought about the evening 11 days ago, though it felt like another lifetime, when she'd stood in this building's lobby with a resignation letter and a need for a normal life. She understood now that the life she'd been trying to get to had never been the life she'd actually wanted. The life she'd actually wanted was harder and less predictable and more expensive in every way that mattered. And it was this room, this work, this fight that wasn't over but was at least being fought in the right direction, with the right people, with her eyes fully open. She turned to Taijin. "You need a chair at this table," she said. "Not a visitor's chair. The one at the end." "There's one at each end," he said. "I know," she said. "I'll take the other one." Something happened in his face. Not the almost smile, not the movement behind the eyes. Something more complete than either, and more unguarded than anything she had seen him allow. And it lasted long enough that she stopped finding reasons to look away from it. He pulled out the chair at the far end of the table. She sat in the one at the near end. Between them, across the length of the table, was a 3-year restructuring plan, and a whiteboard, and the morning light off the Han River, and outside this building a city that had no idea what was changing inside it, and in a building 20 minutes away. 29 households with correct rent rates and a resident board that included Mrs. Cho, and in Imani's bag a signed set of terms that meant she was, for the first time in her professional life, exactly where she had chosen to be. She opened the second folder. "Talk me through the dissolution sequence," she said. "From the beginning." He sat. He talked. She listened and took notes and asked questions that made him stop and recalculate twice, which he did without irritation, and the morning moved forward in the way that good work moves. Not smoothly, not perfectly, but with the specific momentum of something being built by people who understand the material and have stopped pretending the difficulty isn't there. At some point, the plant on the windowsill in his office 2 doors down was still growing toward the light, recovered from its 2 weeks of neglect, unremarkable and quiet and persistent. At some point, Mrs. Cho straightened the notice in the lobby, looked at it, decided slightly crooked was fine, and went upstairs to make tea. At some point, the city outside went on being itself, enormous and indifferent and full of people navigating the distance between the life they were living and the one they were trying to build. And in a room on the 38th floor of a glass tower in the financial district, two people who had never been simple sat across a long table and worked, and the work was the most honest thing either of them had done in a very long time.